Of the Mecklenburg County Board of Commissioners. In light of both continued COVID-19 state of emergency and stay-at-home orders, the board meetings continue to be conducted remotely. The public may join and follow the meeting by viewing on the web at mecnc.gov, mecnc.gov. You may also follow us on YouTube or on Twitter, or you can call the following number, 408-418-9388. Again, 408-418-9388, and enter the following access code, 710-509-284. 710-509-284. We will begin the meeting today by each board member identifying him or herself so that the board can reflect who is present and participating in the meeting. I will introduce myself and then call upon each of my colleagues to do the same as I call out their respective districts. I am George Dunlap. I am participating remotely. I represent the people of District 3, and I also have the privilege of serving as chair. Next, we'll have Commissioner
Pat Cotham, County Commissioner at Large.
Commissioner Ella Scarborough.
Commissioner Ella Scarborough, County Commissioner at Large.
Commissioner Trevor Fuller.
Good morning. This is Commissioner Trevor Fuller. I am privileged to serve as a county commissioner at large, representing all the more than 1 million people who live in Mecklenburg County. I'm participating in this meeting this morning remotely.
District 1.
Good morning. My name is Elaine Powell. I represent District 1, which is all of North Mecklenburg, and I also serve as vice chair, and I am participating remotely.
District 2.
This is Commissioner Vilma D. Leek, representing the most powerful district in the county, happens to be District 2. I, too, am sitting in on this meeting remotely.
District 4.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Jarrell. I represent the people of District 4, and I'm participating remotely.
District 5.
Good morning. My name is Susan Harden. I represent the people of District 5, and I'm participating remotely.
And District 6.
Good morning. This is Commissioner Susan Rodriguez McDowell, participating from District 6.
For the record, all commissioners have acknowledged their presence for the meeting. Therefore, we have a quorum. I will now call upon each of my colleagues to do the same as I call out their respective districts. I am George Dunlap. I am participating remotely. District 1. I would also ask the following staff persons to introduce themselves. Clerk to the board.
Good morning, Emily Kunze, clerk to the board.
Deputy clerk.
Good morning, I'm Christine Smith, deputy clerk.
Our county manager.
Good morning, I'm Dina Diorio, Mecklenburg County Manager.
And our county attorney.
Good morning, Tyrone Wade, county attorney.
Okay, at this time we'll do our Pledge of Allegiance. If you would mute your mics while we do this, please. I pledge of allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So at this time, as usual, we have a few housekeeping rules that we need to conduct. Since we're conducting this meeting remotely, there are a couple of things. This must be an orderly meeting and it must be run smoothly. If commissioners wish to leave the meeting, please ask for a point of personal privilege, state the privilege so that the minutes can capture the action and attendance of each board member. When the commissioner returns, please announce your return when convenient to do so. Since no one is physically present, when a matter is put on the floor for debate, I will have to call on each commissioner and ask whether they have comments. Please wait to be recognized by the chair before speaking, and please refrain from speaking over another person or interrupting another speaker. May I also suggest that each speaker ends his or her comments by saying, "This concludes my comments." If a commissioner does not have any comments, please state, "I have no comments," or "I do not wish to speak to the matter." Since we are meeting remotely, when there is a matter requiring a vote, I will conduct a roll call vote. I will call upon each commissioner separately and ask for the vote to be cast verbally so that there is no confusion as to how a commissioner voted. At the end of each roll call vote, the clerk will state the results of each vote. So thank you for indulging me with that. Today's budget public policy meeting has several items on the agenda. This morning, we will receive a budget overview on the manager's recommended FY 2021 budget. After that discussion has concluded, we will recess the meeting. We will reconvene the meeting in person, social distancing, at the Government Center at 2 p.m. And while it is not stated here, I'm assuming that is in room 214.
267.
Okay, room 267 at 2 p.m. For the remaining part of our agenda, which is our closed session and our appointments. Since the government building remains closed to the public, anyone wishing to join the meeting after the recess will need to dial in using the same information that was previously provided. Again, the purpose of today's meeting is to hear a more detailed presentation of the recommended budget so that we can better understand what is funded and what purpose it serves. If you have questions, we will take the time to address all of them today. Today is the day that you get your questions asked so that when we come for the straw vote, you will know exactly what your intentions are. I will remind you, and some of you will learn from your last experience, surprises do not work. If there's something that you're thinking about doing, it is best to let us know in advance. At this time, I will recognize our County Manager, Dina Diorio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We look forward to this opportunity today to give you a detailed overview of my recommended budget for fiscal year 2021. Our acting management and budget director, Adrian Cox, will lead us through the presentation, and he is supported by our acting budget manager, Lyden Williams. We also have with us today our 5 assistant county managers, Derek Ramos, Leslie Johnson, Anthony Trotman, Mark Foster, and Michael Bryant. And they will be prepared to answer questions about specific department items if you have them. We're also joined today by Paula Herman, our Human Resources Director, to talk through any questions that you may have around employee compensation and benefits. And of course, our Chief Financial Officer, Sarah Cunningham, is on the line if there's any questions around revenues or any forecasting that we've done to put this budget together. If there's questions we cannot answer, we will go back and get them for you. We did make the decision not to have individual department heads on the meeting today because the more people that are on it, it makes it a little bit unwieldy. So we believe that we can answer all your questions, but if something comes up that we can't answer, we'll be sure to get the answer and get it back to you as quickly as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn the screen over to Adrian Cox to walk you through. And I'm not sure, Commissioner Chair Dunlap, if you want to take questions as we go, or do you want to wait until we get to different sections? We'll defer to you in terms of how you want to manage part of the process.
Let's do questions by section, because it might be a little difficult to wait until you're talking about something that you spoke about earlier. So at the end of each section, if you'll let me know when you're done with that section, we'll ask for questions pertaining to that particular section.
Okay, that sounds great. So with that, I'll turn it over to Adrian.
Thank you, County Manager DeOria. Good morning, Chairman Dunlap and members of the board. Today, I'm going to provide you with an overview of the County Manager's recommended budget for fiscal year 2021. The purpose of this meeting is not to propose adjustments to the recommended budget, but to prepare you for budget straw votes that are scheduled for the 26th and the 27th. As the chair mentioned, we will take questions at the end of each section. Next slide. Here is the agenda for the overview. I will go over the estimated revenues, investments that are included related to the board's budget priorities. I will review the recommended budgets for CMS and CPCC. Next, I will go over the community service grants and funding included for the arts. Then I will share the major funding by each agency, as well as the recommended budgets for the Law Enforcement and Fire Protection Service District. Next slide. So I will begin with revenues. Next slide. The economic impact of COVID-19 is anticipated to have a large impact on sales tax that will carry into fiscal year 2021. This chart shows a comparison of sales tax that was collected in prior years to the budgeted sales tax for fiscal year 2020, the estimated sales tax for fiscal year 2021 prior to COVID-19, which is shown in the gray, and the revised estimate recommended for fiscal year 2021, shown in the green. The current year budget for sales tax is $208 million. The estimate for this revenue prior to COVID-19 was $223 million. The recommended budget includes estimated sales tax revenue for the fiscal year beginning in July of $200 million. This is a decline of $7.5 million or 3.6%. So we had previously estimated an increase of $15 million, but now, factoring COVID-19, we're estimating a decrease of $7 million. Next slide, please. This table provides a summary of all county dollar revenue estimated for the general fund. The value of 1 penny is estimated to be $18,752,000. The manager is recommending maintaining the property tax at the current rate of 61.69 cents. Property tax is estimated to increase by $24.5 million, or 2.8%. Sales tax, which I mentioned earlier, is projected to be a $7.5 million reduction. a 3.6% decrease over the 2020 adopted budget. Investment income is projected to be a 52% reduction over the current budget, or $6.2 million. Changes in other county dollar revenues, including license and permits, charges for services, administrative indirect overhead for fee-funded services, and all other county dollar revenue, results in a net growth in county dollars of $19.2 million, or less than 2%, before making any changes. For context, this same value was $63 million for fiscal year 2020 prior to making any adjustment above the revenue neutral rate. In response to these low revenue estimates, the manager is recommending that property tax allocated to the debt service fund would change from 13.3 pennies to 12.58 pennies, adding 3/4 cent in property tax, or $14 million to the general fund. This change will not jeopardize the county's ability to fund future capital and will allow for payment of all debt service while setting aside $60 million for future debt. The manager is also recommending allocating $19 million from available fund balance reserves per our fund balance policy. These two strategies bring the total available county dollars in the general fund to $52 million, a 4.6% increase. Next slide. The county's fund balance policy provides for the use of fund balance for reoccurring expenses. This is an excerpt from the policy highlighting 3 key provisions. The minimum of the total general fund balance and debt service fund combined to the general fund actual revenues will be 28%. If general fund balance falls below the minimum 28% total general fund revenues, the funds must be replenished over the next 2 fiscal years. The unassigned fund balance will be maintained at a level sufficient for the following: to provide the resources to meet operating cost needs and to allow for unforeseen needs of an emergency. It is important to note that every fund balance dollar spent on a reoccurring expense will eventually need to be replaced with ongoing revenues. Otherwise, the budget will have a structural deficit. Next slide. Here are the 3 categories of fund balance. Restricted fund balance required to hold by state statute. Committed are the amounts that have been approved by the board for specific purposes. And unassigned, which is the portion that has not been restricted, committed, or assigned. Next slide. This slide shows a breakout of the county's estimated fund balance for June 30th, 2020. The bar on the left shows total fund balance of $705 million, $237 million in debt service fund, and $468 in the general fund. The bar on the right provides a detail of the county's fund balance by classification. At the bottom, $29 million, shown in dark gray, is restricted in the debt service fund, meaning it's required by state statute. The light gray section shows that $208 million is committed in the debt service fund, which is already set aside by the board for a specific purpose. The dark blue reflects $134 million restricted in the general fund, and $58 million is committed in the general fund, shown in light blue. There is $224 million in unassigned fund balance estimated for the general fund, and $52 million is recommended in the manager's fiscal year 2021 budget. We estimate that $50 million remains of unassigned fund balance prior to triggering a payback requirement. Next slide. In addition to the $19 million recommended to fund a gap in revenue, fund balance is also recommended in the amount of $33 million to provide the one-time expenses shown here. $7.3 million is recommended to fund enterprise reserves for technology, capital, and fleet maintenance. $6.3 million for facility maintenance in phase 2 of the enterprise resource planning upgrade for CMS. $4 million is recommended for affordable housing, consisting of $3 million to the reserve fund and $1 million for the critical home repair program. $2.4 million for the 2023 revaluation. $1 million for contribution to the capital campaign for the Kane Center for the Arts. The town manager of Cornelius is on the agenda to speak to the board tomorrow regarding this item. $600,000 is set in restricted contingency to develop initiatives to address food deserts. $350,000 to develop a library master plan. $271,000 to replace bulletproof vests in our sheriff's department. $271,000 for 2 vans and computers at the Eastway Recreation Center, as well as equipment to support McAlpine Creek. $250,000 for cybersecurity hardware and consulting during the Republican National Convention. $150,000 to convert paper files to digital within the Public Defender's Office. And $122,000 for training and temporary fiscal staffing. When combined with the $19 million, the total fund balance allocated in the manager's recommended budget is $52 million. This is $30 million less than the amount adopted in the current year budget. Next slide. Before I conclude the section on revenues and shift to expenses, I would like to show another slide that Michael Bryant presented to you on May 1st. I think this is an important view of the budget because, as you can see, the $52 million in general fund county dollar growth is recommended at $26.5 million for county services and $25.7 million for education services. County dollar growth in the general fund is allocated to these 2 categories at approximately the same percent. Next slide. That's the section on revenue. I'll pause for questions. I am waiting for questions.
Mr. Chairman, or should we move on from here?
Okay, I'm sorry. I was muted. Okay. Excuse me. We're going to do this orderly. Commissioner Cotham, do you have questions?
Not at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Commissioner Fuller.
Not at this time. I have questions in other parts that relate to this.
Okay, Commissioner Scarborough. Okay, Commissioner Jarrell.
Not at this time, Mr.
Commissioner Leek.
Not at this time, thank you.
Commissioner Harden.
Yes, I have one question. Do we know how much money CMS received in the CARES Act?
Commissioner, I do not know that number, but I can follow up and try to answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Susan Rodriguez McDowell.
Yes, I do have one question. Thank you. On the slide 9 for the information services and technology at $250,000, cybersecurity investments in RNC consulting, is that something that's going to be reimbursed at a later time?
I believe the RNC consulting we hope will be reimbursed at a later time.
So that's the whole $250,000?
No, that's not the whole amount. The RNC consulting is a smaller portion of that. Let me see if I can identify that for you. The RNC consulting is $50,000.
Okay, so that portion would be reimbursed, but the other portion, the 200,000, would not.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Powell.
This is Commissioner Powell. No questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay, I have one question. I want to follow up on Susan Rodriguez McDowell's question. My understanding was that the city would be reimbursed for all of its expenses related to the RNC. How is the county doing different?
So Chairman Dunlap, my understanding is that that is correct. The city is going to be reimbursed where there may be capital expenses, but this is for a consulting for IT.
Consulting for IT.
That's
okay.
Right.
All right. Thank you. All right.
Chairman Dunlap, if I can follow up to one of the responses, just as a point of clarity, this is new information that we received, so Adrian was not privy to this. The consulting, the RNC consulting will also be the county's expense. Only security will be supported by reimbursement.
Okay. I'm sorry, would you say that again?
The $50,000 that Adrian pointed out relative to the RNC consulting expense in response to Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell, that dollar amount is currently will not be reimbursed. It will remain a county cost. This is new information that we received that Adrian wasn't privy to.
Okay, so nothing actually is reimbursed then?
Currently, that's the case.
All right. Okay, I think we're prepared to move to the next section.
All right. Now I will provide the details of the investments recommended for the board's 5 funding priorities. Next slide. The manager's recommended budget includes $23 million in new investments aligned to the board's budget priorities. When added to existing funding, the total annual investment recommended by the manager is $176 million. Next slide. For the priority to reduce racial disparities, the recommended budget includes $2.5 million in new investment. The largest of these being the Unite Charlotte program to fund grassroots nonprofits, followed by funding to address food deserts in the county. Next slide. Here are the details of these investments. $1.3 million is recommended for the United Way's Unite Charlotte program, a program that provides grant funding for grassroots organizations and programs geared towards improving economic mobility. The funding will be used to support 25 Tier 1 grants of $25,000 and participation in the Duke University Nonprofit Management Training Program, as well as 10 Tier 2 grants consisting of $40,000 along with executive leadership training. $600,000 is recommended set aside in restricted contingency for initiatives to address food deserts in the county. $150,000 is recommended to fund a new community service grant to the Young Black Leadership Alliance, who will provide college preparation and leadership training. Also recommended is $125,000 to support the initial phase of Three Sisters Market Food Co-op. In addition to these investments, the recommended budget also includes $80,000 for additional interpreting services in child development services, $77,000 for an MWSBE project compliance coordinator, $50,000 for a new community service grant with Loaves and Fishes, and $50,000 for a new community service grant with Prospera, North Carolina. These investments total $2.5 million to reduce racial disparity. Next slide. For the priority to fund MEC Pre-K, the manager is recommending an additional $5.5 million. When added to existing funding, total funding for MEC Pre-K would be $21.2 million. This new funding will allow for 20 new classrooms for a total of 89. Total funding recommended for early childhood education is $42.2 million. Next slide. For the priority to address affordable housing, new investments of $4 million are recommended. This includes $3 million to the rental subsidy fund and $1 million for the second year of critical home repair. The total investment to this priority is $24.6 million. Next slide. Here are the details of the investments for this priority. The manager is recommending an additional $3 million to the housing subsidy fund, adding to the $11 million placed in the fund in fiscal year 2020. $1 million is recommended for the second year of the critical home repair initiative through Habitat for Humanity, which will be used to repair 31 additional homes. The recommended budget also includes $30,000 for a new community service grant with Time Out Youth Center to provide housing for LGBTQ youth ages 11 through 20. Next slide. Moving on to investments in mental health support, $6.2 million in new investments are included in the manager's recommended budget, which includes funding for CMS support staff, exceptional student staffing, and investments to address mental health within our detention facilities. When added to the existing funding, total funding to support mental health is recommended at $50.5 million. Next slide. Here are the details of the mental health investment. $3.4 million is recommended for CMS to add 15 social workers, 15 counselors, 5 psychiatrists, and 2 behavioral health specialists. $1.2 million is included to fund an increase in our contracted medical services, adding additional staffing to our detention facility. $946,000 is recommended for CMS to add staffing to support exceptional students, consisting of 5 teachers, 5 teacher assistants, 4 itinerant pre-K teachers, and 2 occupational therapists. In addition, $350,000 is recommended to fund a grant match in partnership with the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council to expand therapeutic services for raise the age youth that have been touched by the criminal justice system, and $180,000 for a new community service grant with Mental Health America of Central Carolinas for a total of $6.2 million. Next slide. Here is a summary of funding for parks and greenways. New funding is recommended for this priority in the amount of $5.2 million. Next slide. Here are the details of these investments. $2.8 million is included for staffing at the Eastway Regional Recreation Center. Also, there is $1.5 million for the utilities, maintenance, and security to operate the new facility. The recommended budget also adds $280,000 to operate Latta Creek and Stevens Creek Nature Centers. $159,000 is included to enhance security patrols at multiple locations. $137,000 for expenses related to new greenway sections. $100,000 to add 2 positions for American Legion Memorial Stadium. $100,000 for field maintenance. $70,000 for additional summer camps, and $60,000 to add programming at our nature center, for a total of $5.2 million. Next slide. Manager's recommended budget also includes funding to support county employees. In fiscal year 2020, the county began a comprehensive review of our classification and compensation, realizing that county employees lagged competitors as pay structures had not been adjusted in over a decade, which causes challenges to recruitment and retention. The 5.5% increase provided in the fiscal year 2020 budget was the first step bringing salaries closer to competitors. Due to the estimated revenue loss of COVID-19, the second step, implementing the results of the new review, will be delayed. Although we must delay the update to the classification and compensation system, the manager's recommended budget does include $9.2 million to provide a 3% pay increase, $4 million to provide an increase in employer contribution to the local government employees retirement system. $1.3 million is required for medical and dental insurance, $708,000 to annualize positions that were approved in fiscal year 2020, $444,000 for law enforcement separation, and $682,000 to support a 3% increase for medic. These investments total to $16.3 million. Next slide. This chart shows a 10-year trend in positions approved in the budget by 3 classifications, for full-time, part-time, and limited part-time. Positions recommended in the manager's budget total to 6,361. The increase is primarily driven by part-time and limited part-time staff added to operate new facilities in park and recreation. Full-time positions are recommended to have a net increase of 1 over the fiscal year 2020 budget. In comparison, from fiscal year 2019 to the fiscal year 2020 adopted budget, the net increase in full-time positions was 132. Next slide. That concludes the section related to the board's budget priorities. Are there any questions?
Okay, we'll again start with Commissioner Cotham.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question, and it's on the page number is 12. It says Board of County Commissioners Budget Priorities. And my question is the difference in the percent. Excuse me, were you going to say something, Mr. Chairman?
No.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I know in our community has talked about affordable housing being the #1 concern among our residents, yet our total investment is, as I am to understand, is 14%. And I see the parks, which are also very important, but they're 30%. Can you just explain to me, sir, Mr. Cox, a little bit about how you rank them, how you rank these priorities, percentage-wise? Do you do that in the beginning of this process, or do you do it toward the end? I mean, how do you, in creating this budget?
So the priorities are taken into consideration throughout the budget process. With regard to the percentage of funding, 2 things. If you'll recall, the affordable housing is a relatively new space that the county began getting into in the last fiscal year. Also, I would also add that sometimes the dollar amount is not necessarily indicative of the impact.
Yeah, I understand that. But again, it was the most important thing in our people. But thank you for answering my question.
Okay, Commissioner Fuller.
All right, thank you. I have a couple of questions. I'm going to start with I can't remember what slide this is. Looks like it's slide 14, new funding to reduce racial disparities. Help me understand this $1.3 million grant to United Way. What is this grant supposed to do, and how is it supposed to help us reduce disparities?
Thank you, Commissioner Fuller. This is a grant program that is run through the United Way. The grants would go to those grassroots organizations that have encountered boundaries to being able to participate in other programs, even for example, our community service grant process can propose some barriers to some smaller grassroots organizations.
And so how is this, I'm not understanding how this is going to help us reduce racial disparities by giving United Way $1.3 million.
So let me take a step back here. The United Way created a program called Unite Charlotte, and it's been in operations since 2017. And the whole point of that program is to provide funding to grassroots organizations within the community that don't have an opportunity to compete for other grant programs, like our community service grant program. And so they spend time with organizations like the Refugee Support Services Center, the Westside Community Land Trust, Profound Gentlemen, all of these organizations, Race Matters for Juvenile Justice, organizations that are designed to do grassroots work with underserved communities in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. And this was one of the priorities and one of the requests that Commissioner Jarrell had pointed out during the topics of interest was how do we get funding into the hands of these smaller boots on the ground grassroots organizations. And so what we decided to do was to fund the existing program at the United Way, helps develop capacity and provide services to these grassroots organizations to be able to help them build up and be able to provide additional services in the community. So the money is not for the United Way, it is to fund grassroots organizations within our community and help them build capacity to be stronger.
So in essence, the United Way is an administrator or a pass-through, or how would you describe that?
They're the administrator of this grant program. And so they have it's a competitive process. They vet all the organizations, they do metrics in terms of the services that they're providing, which is all incredibly important. But I think the other thing that they do is really great is that they, enroll these organizations in Duke's program for nonprofit professional management. They do leadership training for these nonprofits to be able to get them to a better place from a capacity perspective. It's a very comprehensive approach and far better than what we do here internally in the county.
Okay. I'll have some other questions about that later, but let me move on to another, which is the pre-K. And so you have an increase here of $5.5 million. So what is that to cover? What is it intended to cover?
It's going to cover 20 new classrooms.
Okay. And so I remember we were talking about getting to the 0 to 3 cohort of kids. Is there any funding related to that part of our pre-K initiative?
No, we're still trying to scale up for 4-year-olds. So this would get us to, this would get us additional 20 classrooms, 89 classrooms, serving a little over 1,600 4-year-olds.
Okay. And then on this, the last thing I have on this, so you have $20 million for the child care wait list, $700,000 for the workforce wait list. So if I thought that we had reduced the wait lists. So is this 20 million, for example, for the child care wait list, is that because we anticipate the wait list growing again, or what's the 20 million for in this budget year?
Well, it's to continue to serve birth to 3 children or birth to 5 children with, if you don't send your child to pre-K. But you know, the number of kids that come on and go off is fluid. So that we were allowed, this allowed us to eliminate the wait list, but we always have people that come on and then we have kids that roll off. This is to be able to provide the same level of service, the same level of subsidy on a go-forward basis.
Oh, I see. So now, having taken them off the wait list, you want to keep the wait list down, and each year you add new kids. So is it about? Is the increase every year about $20 million, or you just think that is that going to be like an ongoing 20 million? You think
it's not an increase of 20. It's the existing 20, so it's flat from one year to the next.
Okay, but you think that'll go on through other fiscal years?
I expect the need for childcare subsidy away.
Okay. All right, and one more. I'll try to get on this cycle. So I'm looking at the affordable housing, and you have $3 million going into the Affordable Housing Subsidy Fund. The question I had is, what happened with the $12 million last year, and if it all went away, and we're only adding $3 million this year, what's the impact of that going to be? So the first question is, what happened to the $12 million from last year?
I'm going to ask Anthony to give you an update on where we are with those affordable housing programs.
The contracts took about 6 months to actually finish because there were some legal issues working with the foundation. So many of those contracts are started in February. So the money is still there.
Okay. How much did you say is still there of the 12 million?
I would say a majority of it is still in claim.
All right.
I'm not sure of the current amount. I can get back to you on that number.
Okay. Yeah, because the follow-up question I would have on that, and you'll probably have to get the information on this, but how many people were we able to serve with it from last year? And then how many people will be able to serve this year? And then the other question is, how were they served? Were people given just a check and they were supposed to give it to their landlord, or did we give the check or the amount to the landlord, and how much average, those kinds of questions. So I know you can't answer all those things right now, but those are the things that I would want to know about last year so I can evaluate the $3 million for this year. All right, those are all right now. I've got other ones, but that's all for now.
And Commissioner Fuller, this is Anthony again. Most of the funding, again, was for rapid rehousing, and that's up to 2 years of subsidy for those individuals that are in the MEC Home program. And then the other program was with the men's shelter, and that was called Link Housing, and that was to link men to housing while they were waiting their Social Security disability benefits or other benefits. So that funding potentially could last up to a year for those men that were being linked to affordable housing. So it was rapid rehousing and link housing were the two major initiatives for that funding. And again, both those programs start around the February timeframe, and the money that used in those programs will be carried forward into the following year. So we still have a large amount of that funding that's still left, and I'll get you the specific amount for each of those programs.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just really trying to get to, what effectiveness we've had for those funding. So hopefully we'll get those answers later. Those are all the questions I have, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Scarborough, do you have any questions at this point?
point. Did you hear me, Chairman Donut?
I'm sorry. No, I didn't. Go ahead.
No, I don't have any questions at this point.
All right. Then we'll go to Commissioner Leak.
My concern is on page, I don't have a page. It deals specifically with United Way, United Charlotte. I'm not sure what progress has United Way produced with United Charlotte that is helping to relieve poverty through racial disparities.
We'll get you some additional details about the organizations they've funded so far and the outcomes that they've seen.
And who is in charge of presenting the program?
United Way.
I mean, in staffing wise, because when you talk about reducing racial disparities, the people whom you're making reference to need to look like those who deliver the services. So that's where I have a problem there with United Way. Are you there?
Yes. Anything else, Commissioner Lee?
Yes, it is. As it relates to the young Black leadership, who's going to be in charge of that at Johnson C. Smith? Is that a Johnson C. Smith program, or is that another program under the umbrella of Johnson C. Smith?
Anthony, can you answer that?
I can answer that. Commissioner Lee, that is a recipient that the manager is recommending to receive funding from our community service grant. It's with the Young Black Leadership Alliance. They would be a first-time recipient if the board approves that recommendation. The programming that they offer would be affiliated with J.C. Smith as well as UNC Charlotte.
All right, thank you. And my next question deals with the Three Sisters Market. Can you indicate what you mean by initial phase? What does that entail?
The initial phase is to help them set up a pilot site at a location on West Boulevard, and it would help them purchase equipment and upfit the space to be able to get them to be able to move forward with their food co-op concept.
All right. Now, my next question deals with CMS. If we could quickly turn to CMS, support staffing. I have a concern that we gave CMS money last year for these same areas of concentration, social workers, counselors, psychiatrists. We have yet to receive a report on the employment of those individuals to bring about a change or help with the problem with the school system. So where are we with that in terms of information and success and non-success?
Well, we can get some specific details, but my understanding is that they have filled all of the positions that we have funded for them in these areas. But I will check that.
All right, so that does go all the way down to funding 5 teachers to 15 social workers. So this is staffing that we're paying for, am I right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and does that include sites where these people would be located in what schools?
We can get that information for you.
All right, thank you. I need that information as it relates to the staffing of that process. And I think my last question deals specifically with going back to mental health issues that we are talking about. How can we alleviate some of the problems we have with homeless that's related to mental health? What do you plan to do with that?
Well, we provide wraparound services for the vast majority of the homeless programs. So when we move people from homelessness into rapid rehousing, we provide all of the social wraparound services and support to help assist with behavioral health issues. So the county is very involved in that. And we spent quite a bit of money on the behavioral health aspects of our homeless residents.
Well, how do we know how successful we are? Do we have an evaluation process in place to determine the success or non-success of this program?
We do, and we've done an evaluation on those programs in the past, but the metric that we use basically is how long people stay housed. And if we are successful, then people can they remain in housing for, forever. And that's the metric we use there, but we can get you some more data on that.
All right, and my last question deals with housing. Have we considered not purchasing a hotel ourselves because of the great expense it calls us for housing? Or have we thought about some of the large warehouses that we could turn into apartments that would alleviate some of the heavy expenses placed on the county?
We have not, but we can certainly take a look at that.
All right, well, please do put those down as concerns. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right, as a reminder, we will be meeting with CMS on Wednesday. I think they're doing their presentation on Wednesday. Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
Will that be, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Will that be for just 1 hour, or will we be able to ask questions?
You will be able to ask questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of personal privilege.
Yes.
I've been hearing this feedback on the line. Maybe I'm the only one hearing it, but it's happened over a couple of meetings, and I wonder if there's anything we can do to address that feedback. I'm not sure what it is that we hear consistently.
Well, I don't know how many people are not muted, and so I would ask the clerk to make sure that the person who's speaking is the only one whose mic is on. Maybe there's another issue beyond that, and we'll have to have staff look into that. But I try to keep my mic unmuted at least most of the time.
Yes, I do the same. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so at this time, Mark Jarrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I want to say thank you to staff for their work on the budget. So my comments, I don't really have too many questions, but my comments are really going to be coming from a lens of what we're experiencing right now as a community, and really just my belief that we're going to feel the ripple effect for quite some time. And so that's the lens that I'm working with. And really, as I said in the last meeting, I really believe that we're going to have to really prioritize our working families and what that level of support looks like. And so as I'm looking at the section that we just reviewed, I do want to address the grassroots support. I understand that my colleagues have some concerns. I think the manager framed it correctly from my perspective. But I want to be clear that I'm not necessarily married to the United Way being the fiduciary agent as it relates to this. But it is important for us to recognize that grassroots organizations predominantly are dealing with people of color, and they have been sort of locked out of a higher level process because of a lot of barriers as it relates to auditing and the expense of that and their inability to obtain funding. And so with that in mind, I did go to the manager and staff to say, how can we support these grassroots organizations and one, get them access to capital because they do great work in the community. And then number two, how do we help them build capacity and the administrative know-how and skills? And I think this is what it's related to. And Adrian, what I'd like to know as it relates to that, the grassroots support, out of the 1.3 million in funding, how much is allocated for tier 1 and how much is allocated for tier 2?
I can get you the breakdown of that, but I did mention the different types of grants that they have, with 25 being for 25,000 and 10 being for 40,000. And along with that, with each of those grant programs, there is education that's included. But I can get you a breakdown of the total splits.
Thank you. And then as it relates to the education component, which I think is extremely important, we're saying that there's no cost to these organizations to participate in the program, and are they online? Is that what it looks like?
That is correct, Commissioner. The certification and the training is incorporated with the grant award.
Okay, perfect. And I think that really addresses where I was going, but I do want to acknowledge that I know that some folks are have concerns as it relates to United Way, some things that maybe I was not privy to. And so I'm sure that we can work through that and make sure this really does what we intend for it to do. So thank you, Adrian, for that. The next part I want to talk about is really going to be, Commissioner Fuller touched on this as it relates to affordable housing. To be clear on, when we talked about rents previously and during last year's budget, I think in my, and I think rapid rehousing is important, but I also know in my mind that I was looking for a way for us to administratively assist people that are currently housed, but are finding a deficit on a monthly basis. So their income really justifies them paying $800, but they're in a unit that they pay $1,100. And so they find themselves in a $300 deficit, and we were making up that difference for X number of families over a particular period of time. So I would really like for us to have future discussions around what I would call a true rent subsidy program to really help people that are already housed, but making up that deficit. So I don't know when the appropriate time would be to have that conversation around the program, but I'm sure you all will let me know. The next piece that I want to talk about is our support for our seniors. I did not, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the only piece that I saw for our seniors here is our critical home repair, which one, I want to at some point make adjustments to this program to not only include interior help, but external help. So as far as tree removal or other critical items or needs that our seniors may experience. And so I think we have, I guess, the ability to make adjustments to this program. And I would definitely like to do that and use that within the framework of the $1 million allocation. The other thing as it relates to seniors, I didn't see anything in the budget, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Adrian, around some sort of medical delivery for, needs as it relates to medication. What kind of allocations do we already have for them? Because I think as it relates to COVID and the potential that going into the fall, we may see a new outbreak. Our seniors are really disconnected, and I want to be able to not only, I know we do food delivery, but do we have anything allocated for assistance with delivery with medical services, medicine, things of that nature?
We don't have a program in the county that does delivery of prescriptions. We do fund MedAssist, which is a program that actually provides low-cost, free prescriptions for people who are uninsured. One of the things I will tell you is a lot of the pharmacies now are delivering. So if a senior needs to refill a prescription, there are a lot of pharmacies now that are delivering to people's homes. But we would not have the ability to go to a pharmacy, pick up somebody else's prescription, and then deliver it to their home. There's a lot of HIPAA issues around that and other things that, would make it very, very difficult for us to be able to deliver prescriptions to people.
Well, with that said, thank you, Madam Manager. With that said, I still want us to continue to look at additional ways that we can support seniors. I think, again, and I'll reiterate this, I think that they've been really disconnected during this. I know we're doing the food delivery. So whatever options could be out there, I guess we could flush those out. The next piece I want to cover would be continued support for small business. Is the reason why there's not necessarily anything in there in the budget? I don't think I saw anything even around the small business loan program that we established back in November. Is the reason why because we're going to be utilizing the federal dollars we've received or that we will be receiving?
Commissioner Jarrell, with regard to the revolving loan fund, that was set up in the previous year, and so those funds are still available for access.
Okay, so we just review those on a as need basis.
That's correct.
Okay, and then finally, under the reducing racial disparities, I noticed that I think we're moving or trying to move in the right direction there. One of the things that I know that we're light on and that I'm continuing to get feedback from the community is as it relates to support for our immigrant businesses and folks and the barriers that they're experiencing. And I understand when folks are undocumented issues that are hard to control, but certainly I think that has to be incorporated into our reducing racial disparities as it relates to additional support.
And if I could, Commissioner, I will point out two grants that we have there. One is for Prospera, North Carolina, and Prospera provides bilingual assistance to Hispanic entrepreneurs as they try to establish their business. We also have additional funding in our public health department for child development services to provide additional interpreting services.
Thank you, Adrian. And this is the last question / comment. As we're going through this COVID-19 situation, what are we doing as it relates to workforce development? What's in the budget as it relates to that?
Well, as it relates to the COVID-19 funding, of course, that funding is in a multi-year budget that allows those funds to be spent over multiple years. The budget that is recommended does not carve out separate funding for COVID-19.
No, I'm sorry, Adrian. The way I asked that was confusing. What do we have in the budget as it relates to any sort of workforce development programming or anything like that?
Well, we do have the workforce housing that is part of our early childhood education, as well as there are other programs that are in our Department of Social Services and our Community Resource Center departments. And I can try to get you a breakdown of all of those.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. Thank you. Those are all my questions, comments.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Susan Harding.
Thank you, Chairman. So, Adrian, I want to follow up with something you just said. The COVID funding has to be expended by December as opposed to a multi-year situation. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. Well, first, let me say, when I say a multi-year, I'm speaking about fiscal year. So what I mean is that we are now in fiscal year 2020, and next year will be in fiscal year 2021. By placing those funds into a multi-year budget, we're able to spend them across those fiscal years and would not have to wait till July to spend them.
Oh, thank you. That's helpful clarification. Thank you. Can we go back to the MEC pre-K slide? So, if help me understand the child care wait list again. I remember that when we were talking about the child care wait list, there was a tremendous backlog. And so we put forward the $20 million investment to clear that backlog. Do we have any, I mean, and then I thought there was going to be a more sustainable level, not at the $20 million level. Can we can you talk to me more about that?
So the $20 is the existing funding, and that $20 million is expected to carry forward for 2021. And with that $20 million, that is how we were able to reduce the wait list.
Okay, can you say that a different way, because I'm that's not landing with me. So my understanding is that last year we made an investment of $20 million. How many children, and we were going to clear the child care waiting list to 0. Did that happen?
Yes, that happened, but the demand for childcare is going to remain at the same level because as kids move off the childcare wait list and go into a childcare slot, more kids are coming in seeking childcare. So you're not going to get to a point where you're going to see the demand for childcare subsidy be reduced. We cleared the wait list, and now we're able to serve all the children as they come in, as kids move on and go to pre-K and kindergarten. So you have kids that move off child care subsidy, and you have more kids that come in for child care subsidy. So the demand is always going to be at the level it is, or it could increase. This amount is intended to be baselined in the budget on a go-forward basis to be able to manage the child care subsidy population as we see it today. And again, that changes.
Was there any balance left in the $20 million from last year?
I can check and see if there's a balance left.
Okay, that would be great. If there's carry forward, I think I would like to know that. And can we get a map or some sort of sense of impact on where those children live, and that maybe some what kind of demographic information are we allowed to have? I mean, how can we understand what the impact that has made to the community?
We can get you the demographic information of the children that we serve, I believe, but we can also show you where the centers are, where kids are receiving subsidy.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I think that's a significant amount of money. And that's a significant amount of money to make that commitment every year. And when we think about, helping working families and reducing racial disparity, I think that those are some of the things that we can point to as well. And again, I want to know that we're spending that $20 million, that's the sustaining level going forward, and that's the right number. So I would appreciate knowing what that balance looks like in there, and how many children we served and those kind of things. The second question I have is related to, can we go to the affordable housing screen? Okay, so my question is for Mr. Trotman. So Mr. Trotman, I guess I understand that it takes a really long time to set up the program. I guess I'm wondering, are we gonna be in the same position this time next year where we have unfunded 12 million and an unfunded 3 million?
I would say no to that question. Unfortunately, this year it took us several months to finalize the contract with the Foundation for the Carolinas. And we just finalized that contract in February. That was a new relationship with us where the foundation had not had the level of performance expectations in contractual relationships that with any other organization. Most of their funds come in and then they manage them as they see fit. But we had several performance metrics that we wanted to make sure that we reported out to you all. So that is complete. It is a multi-year contract, and so we shouldn't see the same type of delays moving forward.
Well, I guess I think it would be helpful to get a report from that organization, because I'm asking myself, is that the right place for these funds? Because I'm with Commissioner Jarrell on this. I was, when we see people hurting in the community and that money's not getting out to them, I feel like I don't know. That feels frustrating to me. And I guess in my mind, I'm asking ourselves if it took, here we are in May, we're nearly at the end of the fiscal year. Very little relief has gone out. Is that the right thing to put more money into? Mr.
Well, yes. My answer to that is yes, because the Away Home Endowment, which is really the contracted entity, already had structure in place to manage those funds and work with all the various nonprofits in the community where individuals were seeking housing. So the infrastructure was already in place, but a contractual relationship where we would be managing performance was not in place. The performance of the Away Home Endowment was very good, which is why we wanted to work with them versus duplicating effort in the community. So we feel good about the relationship. We just took a little longer to establish a relationship with the county.
I hear you, Mr. Troutman, but we have no outcomes to point to. Zero from our investment, and we're increasing the investment.
Yes, we've always had a relationship with the Away Home Endowment. Specifically, we provided the supportive services where the endowment provided the subsidy. And so there are some really good outcomes with the endowment for the other funding that they received. We're just, really in the beginning stages, probably the first quarter of the funding that we provided them. And so I would say I would give it at least a year to see the level of performance. I am on the board of the Away Home Endowment as well as the county manager. And so there's definitely oversight in how they will be managing those funds. Staff are also on the technical committee to ensure that the infrastructure is there and all the internal controls are there to ensure that they are being good stewards of the county's funds.
The other thing I want to add as well is that the additional $3 million is not necessarily going to go to MEC Home. We've put that money aside to look at other opportunities to be able to engage in the affordable housing space. So there's not been a commitment made to put that money into the MEC Home program. And so we will be coming back to the board as we did last year or this current year about recommendations about how we might want to spend this additional $3 million for affordable housing. So I want to make sure that's clear as well. And so any ideas that you have about that would be very helpful.
Thank you. That's helpful, County Manager. I appreciate that fill-in. That's good. So I want to talk about the slide that shows positions. And I'm going to reference, even though we don't have it here, I want to reference page 67 in the recommended budget book. And even though we are adding one, or let me see here. Let me see if I understand this right. We're adding one full-time position and net, 8 positions on the part-time. As if you look at the breakout, you see that the department that has the most loss in positions is our public health department, losing 7 positions this year. And second behind that is our social services department, which is losing 4 positions this year.
Commissioner Harden, if I can.
I'm not finished with my question. If you'll allow me to finish, Adrian,
Yep.
Thanks. And so I guess that feels just so not where we are right now with the community. And so I think there needs to be some more explanation, at least in the budget book, or provided to the community about why during this pandemic, And when we're going to have so many unemployed people needing access to social services, why we're actually cutting staff. My question's finished. Thank you.
Okay, and I appreciate that that question. For public health, the 7 positions that went away during the current fiscal year were for a specific grant program that we knew was expiring. And so that grant has expired and the positions were vacant and are no longer included in our count. With regard to DSS, those are 2 positions that were transferred to other departments. So I believe they're in the Department of Community Resources. And also within your book, there are some other pages, I believe, that follow that break down all of the changes in our positions and how they changed over the course of the year.
I appreciate that, but even though those were grant-funded positions, that means it just feels to me like we're reducing public health services as those grants went away. And can you tell me, the process that you went through? I mean, I know that we're doing some small increases in our public health department, but it feels, I just have a hard time explaining that in terms of the provision of public health to our community right now. So can you help me understand the process of, when the public health department presented their budget to you and we're going through this and you're looking at what the needs are and how we can just let those positions go away, even though that they're grant funded positions?
So with regard to these positions, these were state funded positions and the state funding went away early in the year and we knew that it was going away. So these were vacant positions. So it did not present itself as a reduction.
Okay, so I think that's a question that I would like to know more about what services the community no longer will have as a result of those state positions going away. What kind of health care did that program provide that's no longer existing, public health program? And so anyway, I guess those are just questions I have. And I just want to go, and I just want to be sensitive of my time. Can we just go to the mental health page real quick? The mental health, and then that's the end of my questions. So I think that, again, I want to double down on Commissioner Durrell's comments about seniors and mental health. And I think that there's going to be so many mental health needs as a result of what we're dealing with in our community. And as I look at and I'm pleased about the commitment to CMS and the Sheriff's Office, but as I look at all of the increases that we're providing, they're either for youth or they're for the Sheriff's Office. And again, if you look at the community service grants, mental health, one-on-one group support for families with youth experiencing, and it's good, but there's so many adults and so many seniors that are absolutely struggling with mental health issues right now. And I don't see anything in there that could help provide greater access to mental health services for them. So can you talk about that, Adrian?
Well, Commissioner, this is Anthony. I just want to interject real quick. Going back to the public health question around staffing. Part of the issue there is there's a huge competition for nurses. We are in competition with our 2 healthcare providers. And as we look at the pay differences between those 2 organizations, we sometimes lose out. So we are carrying a high number of vacancies that we're working to fill. And ultimately, it's difficult to continue to add additional positions on top of the existing vacancies. We are working with our HR department to improve our recruitment and retention activities, as well as looking at, you know, the appropriate pay scale to compete with the existing partners. The other healthcare providers are also struggling to find nurses. There's a nationwide shortage of nurses, and that's one of the larger position counts that we have in public health.
Thank you, Anthony. So that's a great broader question I have. Can I just get an amount of what is the amount of our lapsed salaries? Here, you know, across all positions, and having it broken out by position, I think would be helpful.
Yes, we have that on a list of follow-ups, and we'll be providing that for you.
Okay, super. Okay, that ends my questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, Susan Rodriguez McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go to slide 14, please. Just a clarification sort of question on the loaves and fishes or the reduced racial disparities column, $50,000. I'm just wondering, is this something that would have been done prior to COVID-19?
Commissioner, this likely would have been. This 50,000 will be used for this new community service grant. They're going to purchase vans that will allow them to take groceries out to their individual pantries to provide access further out in the community.
Okay. Yeah, I just wonder is there any way to get that $50,000 into our COVID budget so that it takes it out of this budget? So I don't know if that's a rhetorical question or like a question for later or whatever. But anyways, I just wanted to raise that as a thought. And can we go to slide 15, please? Can you clarify, help me understand, I see, you know, we've got MEC pre-K, we've got child care wait list, and then we've got workforce wait list. What, can you describe what workforce wait list means?
The work.
Yes.
You want me to go, Adrian? Do you want to go?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So we set aside $700,000 specifically to provide child care subsidy for individuals that are going through our workforce development programs through the Department of Community Resources. We didn't want them to be on the wait list, and we know that people who want to go through workforce development programs need childcare, and we wanted to make sure that that was available to them as they went through this workforce development programs. So it's
okay, excellent.
Set aside for them.
Okay, fantastic. So it doesn't really have to do with MEC pre-K itself. It's more about supporting folks who are going through a workforce development program.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then on slide 19. Okay, let's see. I wanted to ask about two items. Both of these CMS items, support staff, 15 social workers, 15 counselors, 5 psychiatrists, 2 behavioral health. I definitely support this idea, but I wanted to understand that item plus the exceptional student staffing item at $945,000. Are both of those items things that should be funded by the state as opposed to the county? Like when we talk about county expenses due to the void of state funding, would that be added to our already $372 million? Is another $4.3 million, or does that fall under a different category?
Commissioner, I believe that you are correct. With regard to the county's required support for schools, it is primarily for capital and capital maintenance. So anything in addition to that, we are filling a gap that's not being met by the state.
Okay, I'm just staggered by that, and I need a moment to collect myself. But moving on to slide 20, Parks and Greenways. So the there's no additional dollars to increase Parks and Greenways, that would fall under capital budget as opposed to this budget. Am I right on that? Just trying to understand if I understand the process correctly.
Right. That is correct. The 5.2 is for operating and staff. Capital programs would be through a different budget.
Okay, cool. Slide 22. Okay. And okay, the law enforcement separation. Can you, I think I've asked this question in the past and I can't remember the answer. What does that mean, 444,000?
What that is that in the state of North Carolina, local governments are required, and they do provide an allowance for law enforcement, sworn law enforcement, when they retire. And I believe that is between the age of 52 and 66. And so we have additional costs associated with that.
Okay. All right. And then moving down to medic wage adjustments at 3%, 681,000. Can you please tell how many positions that increases? You know, how many people get that actual 3%, and also the salary range for those folks?
Sorry, I was muted. I will have to do some research to get you that specific information about the medic.
Okay, that'd be great. I'd really like to know that. And then finally, on the employee pay increase of 3%, can we get a number? I don't know if you guys can, work on getting us a number for hard to fill positions and lowest wage positions. I'd like to, before I would vote for across the board 3%, I'd like to know if we could do a more targeted increase. And so I'd like to get some information around, I guess from HR, what are the hard to fill positions and the lowest wage positions. I think that would be really helpful going forward for me. Let's see.
Commissioner Rodriguez McDowell, on the hard to fill positions, do you just want the titles? Do you want what exactly, what information do you want around those so we can be responsive to your request?
Yeah, I would like to know how many hard to fill positions are there and what would it take to just increase those positions? So it would be great to have the titles and the amounts that would be required to make those positions easier to fill. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Okay, and I don't know if we already have access to that, Dina, somewhere else, as far as ranges for, say, DSS, if we could know if we wanted to put dollars into certain areas, say areas that are for, people who are doing certain types of jobs, it would be really helpful to see what ways we could target our raises as opposed to doing across the board. That's what I'm trying to get at. So okay. Do we already have a place where we can look that up?
Well, we can provide it for you. I don't know if Paula has anything she wants to add to this in terms of what kind of information we can provide.
Okay. Okay, that would be great. I really appreciate knowing, because we are doing a lot of budget here for employees, and it's ways that they may not feel as far as retirement increases and medical and dental. These costs are, going across many departments, but I really would like to see if there are ways that we can target wage increases. So that concludes my questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, Elaine Powell.
This is Commissioner Powell. I'm going to start on the MEC Pre-K. Prior to the pandemic, it seemed like MEC Pre-K might be struggling with the rate of expansion. And so, Adrian, were we planning on more dollars than this pre-COVID and then it was cut, or is this what we were planning on?
This is less than what we were planning on. Initially, the 6-year plan that we have actually had us adding 33 classrooms in fiscal year 21, and we scaled that back to 20. But in terms of struggling to expand, I'm not sure that that's accurate. We were able to open all of our 69 classrooms in fiscal year 20 and fill our seats. So I'm not sure that we had an issue there. We did scale it back for 21 for 2 reasons. One, being mindful of dollars, but number 2, we will need to wait and see, post-COVID as we start to move in to the summer, if we do have people that are going to be willing to send their kids to school. So there is some question about that, but we're going to have to wait and see how that goes. But not continuing with the expansion continues to put us further behind our goal, which is why we wanted to at least fund some new classrooms in fiscal year 21.
Thank you. And when I said struggling, I didn't mean like for the number of children. I just meant getting the qualified, all the teachers educated and qualified and certified and all of that. That seemed to be a struggle. So I'm glad that we kept up with it. Let me read my other questions because I have so many written down. And just in terms of the overall budget, I think responsiveness, able to be responsive to the unknown. And so I'm hearing a lot of questions. And since we can't, we know what some of the future needs might be, but we can't predict all of them. We have to be prepared to be flexible. Will we be able to add, say we need more public health positions, say we need more social services, more mental health support. How flexible can we be once we pass the budget, Dina?
We always have the possibility to come back and appropriate additional fund balance if there's needs that we see over the course of the year that we need to address. But again, we still have the balance of the $39 million, which will at least allow us to fund things through December 31. And so I would recommend that we at least set some of that aside to be able to address unknown needs between now and December 31. But I think there'll still be plenty of money available to address some of the concerns the board has today about post-COVID issues. But we always have some flexibility, again, to appropriate fund balance to address needs as we move through the fiscal year.
And I think that it would be comforting to the public to know that we can be responsive to needs because they're in a situation now where people feel like worried about what the future is going to bring. So thank you for that. On to affordable housing, there's 3 categories for money to go to. And I know that we had a submission that came in late for naturally occurring affordable housing, a request for $82,000. Is there a way that we could, I don't want to add money to the budget, but is there a way we could squeeze in that $82,000 for the naturally occurring affordable housing for the urban ministry and men's shelter? Hopefully there's a way to squeeze it in there without adding to it.
Well, I got an email from Liz Clayson-Kelly this morning about that, and I told her I would take a look at the proposal. One of the things I would like to do is I'd like to look at the balance of the $11 million that we haven't spent from fiscal year 20, and potentially carve off a piece of that for that proposal if there's agreement that that's something that's worthwhile doing. We can certainly send the proposal to the full board. I'm not sure if everybody's seen it and get feedback on it, but instead of adding it as a new line item in 21, because we do have some funding still available from fiscal year 20, that would be my recommendation on how to fund it if there's a majority of the board that feels like it's worthwhile doing. But we will send that proposal out to everybody and we can talk more about it.
Thank you. I just want to bring it up now. I'm trying to bring up everything important now because I don't want to add dollars to the budget at all. I want to be really careful, and I really appreciate the focus on keeping the county stable. I think stability is really important right now. And with that, I don't know if Paula wants to speak to it right now, but I know Adrian brought it up in his introductory comments that what was planned as part of the phased planning for restructuring human resources and paying people at market rate. If Paula wanted to speak about what the plan was pre-COVID versus what it is now, because it seems a lot smaller. Are you there, Paula?
Paula, you may be muted.
Paula, can you hear us? She might be having trouble with her audio because she's unmuted, it looks like, but I don't hear her. So let us try to resolve that and we can maybe come back to that.
Okay. Because I think people were surprised to see 3%, but I remember when she gave her presentation, I think it was bigger than that.
It was significantly bigger than that.
Yeah, so I just want people to know that there's a lot of fiscal stewardship going on.
Paula, can you hear us? And we'll follow up with her and find out what's going on.
Okay, that concludes my questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I had a couple of questions, but probably more comments based on things that have been said. So I want people to know where I am with this budget. But before I get to that, I want to ask a couple of questions. This past year, we had a lot of questions and a lot of people appear before us with issues relative to MEDIC. And we were working to resolve that issue, but a lot of things, of course, have gotten in the way and we're still not prepared for a recommendation. So have we considered whether or not we would appropriate funds to help decrease the hardship on those people who are facing financial difficulty in paying their medic bills?
Mark, do you want to respond to that?
Sorry, I just had to get off mute. We're looking at that and we'll be back to you with more information in the coming days.
Okay, that's fair enough. The second question dealt with something that was brought up last year as well. We talk a lot about our seniors, and one of the things that was proposed was some additional relief for seniors in their tax bill. We had talked about a program that the city had, and I really expected by now we would get some more information from the city about how they conduct their program, because there was a lot of interest in terms of being able to provide money to the city so that they could administer that program, seeing that there was a belief that we couldn't. Has there been any follow-up on that?
I'm going to toss that to Tyrone and ask him to give his perspective on that program.
Well, good morning. We have had conversation with the attorneys. The program, though it is funded, has not yet been fully implemented to the degree that the city thought. There have been some questions raised by the school of government as to if it's challenged, what that might look like. So we are still looking at the legalities of the way it's structured and what it might look like for the county if we want to partner or maybe look at something somewhat differently. So it's an ongoing effort to try to understand how best to implement something from the county's perspective.
And thank you for that follow-up. The reason I raised the question is because we didn't do anything last year, and I don't know how long it's going to take the city to resolve the issue, but I didn't want to miss another opportunity to do that. And so it appears that if we don't set funding aside, that will be another year's delay in doing that. But I did want to make sure that the interest was still there. I want to talk a little bit about page 14, since there have been a lot of questions about that. And that deals, mostly about the funding going to United Way. I think a lot of people probably don't really fully understand that yet. I am like a lot of other people. I'm not excited about the so-called big organizations overseeing the funding that is going to be administered to some of these organizations. However, I've come to realize that the only way that we can do this and get the accountability that we expect is to have somebody who will be responsible and make sure that these smaller organizations meet the expectations that the county would have of any organization, especially as it relates to accountability. And so the United Way already has a program set up that will allow these nonprofit organizations to receive additional training so that they understand accountability and that they properly account for funds that they receive, and they can demonstrate performance related to the funds they receive, which is the reason why I support these funds going through United Way. I just happened to walk into a meeting that Mark Jarrell was conducting with a lot of these organizations. And since that time, I met with a couple of them. And I think both the manager and Mark hit on something that we've been missing for a long time. And it explains why it goes to reduce racial disparities. A lot of the organizations that are doing much of the work in our community, and as Commissioner Leak always points to, people who look like the people in the community, they don't have the funding to do the work that they're doing. And so as a result, many of them struggle, and many of the needs are not being met because nobody is meeting that need. At that meeting with Mark were a whole bunch of organizations, some I'd never even heard of. And they're doing tremendous work in our community, but they struggle for funding. In fact, I saw a couple of those organizations on the news during the COVID situation where they were providing meals and things of that nature, still struggling to meet their budget to help our community. And so I thought this was an outstanding way to be able to fund those organizations so that they don't struggle and that they meet the needs that are being required in some of these underserved communities. And so if United Way is the source that we can get the accountability that we expect from some of these bigger organizations, then so be it. But I do understand the concern about some of these bigger organizations kind of overseeing them. But, you know, one of the things I've come to understand about Mecklenburg County is that no matter who we deal with, accountability is still at the forefront. We still want to be able to answer to our constituents how we use the money and what it was used for, so that we can say that we were accountable for those dollars. And so infrastructure is important. And I think in this particular case, United Way will provide that infrastructure. Overall, from the budget, one of the things that I like about our staff is that we don't make decisions willy-nilly. The staff prides itself on making data-driven decisions. There is something that points to why they made the recommendations that they made. I heard the discussion about the loss in positions in DSS and other places. What I don't know is how many positions went unfilled during the course of the year in the first place, and if they ever obtained the number of positions that were requested. In that particular department, public information, where there were 7 reductions within the department, there was a total of 844 staff persons already. So a reduction of 7 may or may not be significant based on what services were being provided. So I'd ask that when we look at the budget, that we look at how decisions were made, and that we also consider the fact that we start off with a deficit, and we're fortunate because we had the reserves to be able to fill that gap and not go back to the citizens and ask for a tax increase to do that. So I'd ask that we consider that when we consider the budget. There was a question raised about the law enforcement separation. I am one of the beneficiaries of that separation. What that does is it provides a separation allowance for law enforcement people who retire prior to being eligible for early Social Security. So I retired at age 48. I received a supplement to my income from age 48 to age 62, which is the time that I was eligible for Social Security. And so that's primarily what that fund does for our law enforcement people. And $444,000 is really a small amount to pay for those compensation that people will receive during that time. I want to talk a little bit about the request for increase in staffing. And I appreciate Elaine bringing up the fact that based on what was presented to us, and we all heard this about where we were going with staff compensation, what is being proposed is substantially less than what we anticipated it would cost us. And so to do something less than the 3% across the board, to me, and while I'm not every staff person, has the potential to create a morale issue where some people get compensated and other people don't, but they all work hard. And the justification being that it's simply because one person is at a higher salary than another person. You know, that's the reason some people go to school and get a degree, so that they can be paid for what they know and the value that they bring to the organization. So I would hope that we would not want to do something that would create a morale issue among our staff people. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the rent subsidy. I think Mark brings up a good point about what seniors really want. And I had this lady call me. She was probably in her 70s. And while she was not concerned about the condition of her house, she felt comfortable in her house, even though it probably could have used some repairs. What concerned her most was that there was a tree in her backyard that was going to cost her probably $1,000 to get removed. And the only reason she wanted that tree removed was because it was dying and it had potential to fall on her house. And so rather than think about the condition of the house in terms of the repairs that could have been made, she was concerned about potentially not having a house. And so if there's a way that some of those dollars can be restructured so that seniors who have those kinds of issues can have those needs addressed, I would certainly be in support of that. I do have an additional question about link housing. Anthony, as I understand it, these funds that go to veterans, and they're afforded until the veteran receives their approval or what have you. My understanding is that when the VA does approve, these people receive back pay or funds that they would have otherwise been entitled to at an earlier point. Are we recouping the funds that we spent on these veterans prior to them receiving approval?
No, it's not just veterans, Commissioner. It's also folks that are seeking Social Security disability insurance. We funded a SOAR worker, which is a position that helps those individuals apply for the Social Security disability insurance and or veterans disability. We are not recouping the funds because we're transitioning those folks out of the shelter into housing. And specifically for these individuals, the men's shelter is creating a roommate structure so that the cost associated with the housing and the money that they will receive from the disability insurance, they will be able to afford it. But we did not set up a structure where we would recoup those dollars.
Okay, and then real quickly, I want to make sure that people understand that the loan fund for small business is actually a revolving loan fund, which means that once that money is appropriated, as people pay the monies back, there would be no need for additional funding. And in fact, there could potentially be growth in that program because I can't remember what the interest rate is. It's a small interest rate, but as people pay those funds back, it would just kind of recycle. Monies would be available for other people in the loan as other people pay the loan back. And the same thing is true with the child care subsidy wait list. We may eliminate the child wait list, but we might have 4,000 kids who move off of the wait list because we eliminated it. But this year, we might have an additional 4,000 kids move onto that list, which would be covered by that $20,000. So there's more discussion to be had, but before we move on, I understand that Paula Herman is now available to answer a question that was raised earlier. Paula?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And I apologize for those technical difficulties. Hang on just one second. I'm going to hang up with Chris Cowles, my IT support person. Thanks. Thank you. Bye. So I want to talk a little bit about the project that I presented to you back in January with regard to the classification and compensation project that we've had underway. As you know, we purchased many salary surveys. We purchased software. We loaded survey data into a database. We compared it to our employees' salaries, and we created all new salary ranges for all of the jobs within our purview. So when setting up a salary structure, there's a hierarchy of jobs, and you have a variety of ways that you compare those jobs to the market. So you look at not only the salary surveys, but you look at your recruitment difficulties, because sometimes you do have more difficulties in, like what Mr. Trotman was talking about earlier, with nurses. So sometimes we do studies of hard to fill jobs, and we look at the data, we look at what our competitors are doing to see if we need to do anything special for those groups. So there are times in our past where we have looked at jobs that were market sensitive and have increased those at particular times. We try to do that in groups, and we've in the past rotated so that all jobs were reviewed. But with this study, we looked at everything at once. So we've kind of changed our approach. We've also looked at the approach to how we determine if our salaries are market competitive. And in the past, we've used something called a market rate. But going forward, we're going to be using more range information to look at the entire pay range to determine where employees should be placed within that salary range. When we talked to you earlier in the year, we had, I believe we were looking at $23 million to invest in the salary program. We considered options such as just looking at certain groups and doing the medical group or the IT group, for example. But we, after discussions, as Chair Dunlap said, the employee morale issue in the situation that we're in right now, we've factored in as being more important than targeting particular groups to invest more money in. So while in the past we've looked at certain groups and provided salary increases by the group, that was a rotation. And this year we've just looked at an across the board increase because of employee morale, especially in the situation we're in right now with COVID-19. We're very disappointed that we can't go forward with the project, but we hope that in the coming year, we can continue to stay on top of our market position and take a look at what the labor market looks like so that we can have a better idea of how we'll move forward in the future. Now, I will say that with the increase in the Algers retirement funds, that will be coming out of the employees' amount. So the net increase for the employees is actually not 3%. So I just wanted to point that out as requested. And I'll entertain any other questions at this time.
Well, if I remember correctly, in order to implement phase 1 of the new class and comp study would have been well in excess of $15 million. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. We were looking at a figure like 23 million.
Okay, and then just on the Algers piece, this is an increase in the employer share of retirement costs, not the employee share. The employee share is at 6% and stays at 6%, but the employer share is continuing to increase.
Okay, so I apologize for that. Does Michael Bryant want to chime in on that to clarify?
Manager is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think at this time we're prepared to move to the next section.
All right, thank you. In this next section, I will cover the recommended budgets for CPCC and CMS. Next slide, please. The operating budget for CPCC is recommended at $39 million, an increase of $1.2 million. Fiscal year 20 is the 5th year of a 5-year deferred maintenance plan that began in fiscal year 2016. However, the recommended budget continues deferred maintenance funding for CPCC in the amount of $3 million. Next slide. The next couple slides will cover the budget request and the recommendation for CMS. And as a reminder, CMS is scheduled to discuss their budget with the board at tomorrow's meeting. The recommended budget for CMS operating expenses is $527 million. This is an increase of $25.6 million, and I will go over the details of this funding in the next slide. Including capital maintenance, total funding for CMS is $532 million. As I mentioned previously, fiscal year 2020 is the 5th year of the 5-year deferred maintenance plan. However, the recommended budget includes $15 million to continue addressing deferred maintenance in the upcoming year. Next slide. I'll now walk you through what was requested by CMS and what is recommended. The recommended budget fully funds charter enrollment growth of $9 million. The budget provides $5 million in one-time funding to support building services, but does not include the request for a facility planning director. Funding is included for the local impact of retirement rate increases And as in previous years, the county manager is recommending funding to provide additional student support staff. This request is fully funded at $3.4 million to provide 15 social workers, 15 guidance counselors, 5 psychiatrists, and 2 behavioral health specialists. The recommended budget includes $946,000 for exceptional children's support. This funding will provide for staffing for exceptional children, but additional funding that was requested to supplement the state funding for this particular program is not included. $548,000 is recommended to support 1/3 of the request for maintenance and operations for 1 newly constructed school. One-time funding is included in the recommended budget in the amount of $1.3 million for a second year of the Enterprise Resource Planning Modernization Project. And $1 million is also included for the local impact of health insurance increases. Next slide. The requests on this slide were not recommended for funding. In fiscal year 2020, the adopted budget included $7.4 million to fund the local impact of the estimated state increase for pay for administrative, certified, and non-certified staff. These increases were not included in the state budget, and therefore this funding should be available for CMS to support the other increases in local impact for fiscal year 2021. Other requests were not included that are typically the responsibility of the state or the city, such as security personnel and school resource officers. The manager's recommended budget for CMS totals $25.6 million, and that is 70% of the amount that was requested. The next slide. And that concludes the section for CPC and CMS.
Okay, we'll go down our usual list. Commissioner Cotham, any questions in this area?
Not at this time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Commissioner Fuller.
I have no questions at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Scarborough.
I have no questions at this time.
Commissioner Leek.
Yes, and thank you so much. My question deals with the responsibility of the county as it relates to how much are we to pay by state law to the school board.
Commissioner Leek, that amount that we're required to pay is for capital. And so we pay, I believe it's approximately $360 million more to support positions.
That's what the state says we have to pay. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct. We are required to pay for the capital of schools.
All right. And what is it that the county provides for the school system beyond what the state is required to pay? What do we pay above?
Sorry, I was muted. In the current year, we are supplementing the funding from the state in the amount of $372 million.
So that's what we're doing beyond the call of duty, am I right?
That is correct.
Okay. So we do buildings as it relates to capital support. And what if they sell the buildings? What happened to those funds?
So I believe the county has an option to purchase when they sell a building. But I'll need to defer to possibly Michael Bryan or Dina regarding what happens with that funding.
All right, I can get that later. But my last question deals with the number of new staffing that the school board is asking for based upon what they were able to employ. Were they able to find 15 social workers, guidance counselors, and what was asked for 2020? Were they able to fill those positions?
That is a question that we've passed on to CMS, and so they may be able to answer that for you tomorrow.
Commissioner Lee, based on the last update that was provided by CMS, it was back in January, I think I reported out at your board retreat, the majority of those positions, those new positions that were approved in the fiscal year 20 budget were filled. I think there was only one that they had to go back out and recruit due to an unexpected resignation.
I still would like to know if they were filled, not based upon what we might have had then, where those positions filled for the school system, and they're asking, say, for example, 15 more social workers, that's 30 social workers.
Yeah. Yes, we'll provide a more current update. We can get that.
All right, then. Thank you so much. And I have other questions that I'll ask later tomorrow. So thank you so much. I'm through, sir.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Jarrell.
Adrian, can you repeat the amount that Mecklenburg County taxpayers are contributing above what is required as it relates to education, please?
Yes. We are supplementing with regard to CMS, $372.3 million.
Thank you for that. I think it's important to point out where we are above what we're required to do. And that's what I wanted to bring out, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Susan Harden.
All right, so Adrian, you know, in the idea of paying people fairly, and I appreciate Paula's presentation. Can you talk to me why we wouldn't want to fund school bus drivers to earn $14 an hour?
So Commissioner Harden, the logic behind not recommending that funding is based upon the fact that funding was included in the amount of $7.4 million in the current FY 2020 budget in order to support pay increases for administrative, certified, non-certified staff. Because that state budget was not adopted, that funding is still available for CMS in the ongoing funding.
So when asked for CMS, they said that funding could be reallocated to the bus drivers or redirected to the bus drivers?
CMS has a great deal of flexibility with how they use the funding once it's provided by the board, so long as it falls within the units that are in our adopted budget ordinance.
Okay. I just want to know, is that the explanation when you said that was unfunded? Is that the explanation they gave, that they said that they were going to reallocate that 7.4 to go to pay the bus drivers? Was that a communication?
That was not a communication to me from CMS.
So, and talk to me about what is the enterprise resource planning system, or will we hear more from that from the superintendent? I know we funded it last year, or no?
Correct. You funded the first stage of it last year. An enterprise resource planning systems, and I'm not familiar with exactly the one that CMS is implementing, but typically that is your financial and your workforce management systems.
And as I think about priorities that I would want to fund, certainly funding bus drivers over those technology systems would be something that I would support. So when I think about things that were selected to fund, I'm just trying to understand the logic of funding the technology versus funding the people.
So the ERP system is actually being funded through fund balance, and it's a non-recurring expense. I think this is the last year that we'll be funding that. Funding for bus drivers is recurring funding. And so that would be something that would require us to use future growth revenue to supplement if we were to use fund balance to fund that. So I just want to make sure people are clear the funding sources are not necessarily swappable.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, Commissioner Susan Rodriguez McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I don't think I want a question at this time. I think I'll save my questions for tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Elaine Powell.
Thank you. I don't really have any questions, except that I think that we need to keep talking about the $372.3 million that we're paying above what is required of us. And so we continue to hear from education advocates, and I think it's really important to that custodians and bus drivers are paid better than they are and respected more than they are. But I just wonder why we're hearing from people that think the responsibility falls on us. And so really, I just want to say that out loud before CMS comes to us tomorrow. And that's all. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Okay, I don't have any questions or comments at this time, so we'll move on to community. Any follow-up from staff on this issue before we move on? Okay, if not, we'll move on to community service grants and funding authority.
All right, now I will speak to community service grants and funding for the arts. Next slide, please. Our community service grants process began in October 24th when we held an orientation with many community groups that were interested in applying. Next applications were reviewed by county department representatives. To be considered for a grant, nonprofits must fill a gap in the department's strategic business plan. And after 3 consecutive years of funding through the grant program, agencies are then sunset. A sunset organization can apply to be a vendor with one of the county's departments. Next slide. There are 16 recommended community service grants in the manager's budget and 2 sunset community service grants that will be transitioned onto vendors. Of the 16 grants, there are 6 new grantees. For this slide, I will focus on the new grants, which are noted by a single asterisk. Best Buddies International is recommended for $60,000. They will work to provide social skills and leadership development for individuals with developmental disabilities. Camino Community Development is recommended for $178,000, and they will support a new program to provide individual counseling at their health and wellness center to serve Hispanic Latino population. Loaves and Fishes is recommended for $50,000 to provide groceries through a network of food pantries. Mental Health America of Central Carolinas is recommended for $180,000, and they work to provide one-on-one and group support for families with youth experiencing mental health challenges. Also, Prospera, North Carolina is recommended for $50,000, and they provide bilingual assistance to Hispanic entrepreneurs. And the Young Black Leadership Alliance, funded at $150,000, helps to connect to youth with college and leadership opportunities. The total recommended for community service grants is $1.7 million. The next slide. This slide summarizes the funding for the arts. The fiscal year 2020 budget includes $2,050,000 to the Arts and Science Council for existing programs, including Studio 345, Cultural Blocks programs, and maintenance of Spirit Square. The manager's recommended budget includes an additional $900,000 for Arts and Science Council to support 3 grant programs, $200,000 to support grants to individual artists, $200,000 to support community vision grants, and $500,000 to fund operating grants for the Arts and Science Council, bringing the total funding to $2,950,000. In addition, the budget also includes $1 million in funding to support the Kane Center for the Arts. And next slide. That concludes the section with regard to funding for CSGs and the arts.
Okay, Commissioner Coppin.
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Commissioner Fuller.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did want to note with the community service grants that the total amount of them now is at least recommended at 1.6 million. Some may recall that at one point our community service grants program was funded at about 3 million. I think in 1 year even it went up to 4 million. So there's been a trend down for our community service grants program. Now, part of it could be that we are converting some folks who have received these grants into vendors, and I, generally regard that as a good process. The only thing I would mention, though, is that that process does intensify the problem that we're trying to solve by allocating $1.3 million to the United Way to fund these organizations who generally don't get the funding, who have resource needs, whether it's with their financial wherewithal, their ability to keep the kind of records that we're needing for these community service grants programs. So I hope that we are not reducing our community service grants allocations while at the same time we're trying to bring in new organizations through that United Way funding. So I just wanted to note that potential conflict as I'm watching these allocations for community service grants go down year by year while we're trying to ramp up support to organizations that don't generally receive county funding to do these community service priorities that we have. I want to look at, yes, go ahead.
Commissioner Fuller, if I could speak to that. What we are reflecting, you are correct, that is the amount of the CSG funding, but many of the CSGs, after being sunset and reviewed by departments for alignment with their strategic business plans, have become vendors within the department. So it's not as though we're having a sharp as a decline as it may appear. Within the budget book, pages 10 and 11 provide the CSGs and the vendors broken out.
Okay. Yeah, no, I suspected that was the reason for the trend. What I'm referring to is that as you're doing that, you're not expanding the opportunity for community service grants or people to be converted into vendors, because ultimately the money you're spending on that kind of activity is essentially the same. And so what I'm suggesting is that at a time when we're trying to ramp up groups that historically don't get community service grants or don't get the opportunity to get converted into vendors, that that we've got to keep in mind that we've got to open space for that to happen. And so I'm just noting that while the specific community service grant program is going down, the vendors, the people who have been turned into vendors, has been going up, but the ultimate amount that's allocated to community service like activities is not growing. And therefore we should be aware of it might close off these groups that we're trying to support through this $1.3 million United Way funding. But I want to move to arts and sciences now. So I take it that, well, let me back up. So we had the whole campaign about the quarter-cent sales tax, and then we hear in the paper that our arts community is suffering, or at least ASC. And we've had the COVID that we're dealing with now. Talk to me about what impact this funding is going to have to address the problems that we're, I think, hearing more about in our arts community. And is this enough to address the issues that we've seen? Can somebody talk to that?
I'll respond to that, Commissioner Fuller. This request is a modified request from the original from the Arts and Science Council. And what the manager is recommending is in response to what the president of the ASC said would help them offset some of the impacts to the art community. Because just like as we anticipate other sectors being negatively impacted, they are anticipating that that will be the same to local artists, programming, and the like. So as a result, they put this request together to try to minimize some of that impact in response.
So these things these are things they're already doing, right? They're already doing artist grants, vision grants, and then operating support.
These are existing programs. That's
okay.
Correct.
All right. Okay, very good. Thank you. And then the last thing I had, I know we'll hear a presentation from the Cornelius folks about this Center for the Arts. I do have a question about that. And I see that we're intending to draw down from fund balance to do this. I remember that we had some issues about supporting bricks and mortar requests. I remember when Renaissance West requested for us to support them opening their pre-K, early childhood education facility, that one of the reasons we gave to them that we didn't fund them is that we don't do bricks and mortar. And so help me understand how it is okay in this instance to support the bricks and mortar of creating this Center for the Arts.
So this is a partnership with one of our local municipalities. We've done similar types of arrangements as it relates to parks and greenways. So this is really, I think, different because it's a partnership with one of our towns as opposed to a nonprofit.
Okay. And it looks like that they've been engaged in this for a little while now. Is that, I mean, I know we'll get the presentation tomorrow, but it looks like they've been having this in the plans for a while.
Yeah, they've been working on this for a few years.
Okay. And what would it get, how does this funding help Mecklenburg County residents as a whole to support?
Well, it provides additional arts opportunities outside of primarily, Charlotte. We don't have a lot of arts opportunities outside of Charlotte. So this would expand that and allow other people that live outside the city to be able to participate in arts programs, and not just for Cornelius, but for North Mech generally. So I think it just expands our reach.
Okay. Yeah. And, as you know, I support the arts and our funding of the arts strongly. And I think it is important for us to have opportunities for people to experience the arts beyond just uptown Charlotte. I would note, however, that there are other places even within Charlotte. I think of West Charlotte. I think of Southwest, even East Charlotte. And I don't see us expending the same energy to provide resources for those areas of town. And that's not to pit one part of town against another, but I think it's useful to point out that budgets and recommendations for budgets are always questions about priorities. Who gets the attention and who doesn't? And so I'd ask us to think about that as we consider this recommendation. So those are my questions and comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair Fuller, I would want to point out that the Culture Blocks program, which is $950,000, has gone a long way in bringing the arts into all the communities within Mecklenburg County, including those in West Charlotte and Southeast Charlotte. So, you know, that was, we did that first before we entertained doing something for the Kane Center for the Arts, but the Culture Blocks program is specifically designed to bring arts into all parts of our community. So I don't want that to go unnoticed.
Well, if I can, and I think that's a great point, and I support the Culture Blocks program entirely. And so I thank you for bringing that up. I guess I'm focusing instead on the sort of the more solid investments in the arts in these other areas. Again, not to pit these areas against North Mecklenburg or Cornelius in this case specifically, but just to think about that even the Culture Blocks program is, I don't know if I want to call it transitory, but it's not as solid an investment as having an arts center in another part of town. So I just ask us to think about that when we're thinking about investments that we make in the arts across the whole county. So thank you very much.
And Commissioner Fuller, if I can add just as a point of clarity for the full board, I certainly heard your comments. I just want to make sure that the full board understand that the manager's recommendations regarding community service grants, apples to apples, is $124,000 increase above the fiscal year 20 budget.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that.
Okay.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Commissioner Scarborough.
No additional comments.
All right. Commissioner Leek.
Thank you so much. My question is, what is the sum total that we are providing for the Arts and Science Council in our budget? Hello?
Sorry, I was muted. That is the $2,950,000 that's recommended in 2021.
That's the total amount.
Yes, ma'am.
And their bond asking, I don't know if you remember that or not, what were their bonds asking for the county? I mean, for us to support?
I don't recall the exact amount. I believe it's.
I'm asking because I hope that it doesn't turn out that we are funding what the Arts and Science Council asked for from the very beginning in their bond issue, and people will talk about why do we take taxpayers' dollars to fund an agency that we said no to. That's my concern.
And I believe
the arts portion of the sales tax was about $22.5 million.
But I'm saying to us, with the amount of funding that we're providing and their solicitation of funds to the community lends to some questions about, are we supporting the Arts and Science Council in the back door? This is questions I have been asked.
Okay, are those your questions, Commissioner Lee?
Yes, I'm asking if I'll get an answer to it as it relates to how do we respond to the public in these askings that's being provided by the county with taxpayers' money. Is anybody listening?
Okay, well, I will say that historically, at least in our last year's budget, we were already funding them at the tune of $2,050,000. So this year, the county manager is recommending a $900,000 increase based on the specific areas that you see listed.
And one of the questions I had previously as it relates to the staffing of the Arts and Science Council and I was not pleased with what I saw. And that was one reason I had some concerns about who gets paid and who does not, who's on payroll. So I will continue to ask those questions. So thank you very much.
All right, Commissioner Jarrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Adrian, real quick, as it relates to the allocations of these community service grants, can you provide information that shows what the requests, the funding amount requests were for these organizations?
We can get that to you. I believe there was a total of 42 applications in total, but we can get you the details behind them.
Yeah, I'm just interested in the ones that that are recommended for funding, what their requests were. So are our recommended allocations based on capacity or what we believe their capacity is? How is that decided?
So the recommendations, all of the applications are reviewed by a panel of experts from within the county. And we look to see what type of performance metrics that they think they're going to be able to meet, as well as the type of service that they're providing, so that we can make a decision about whether or not the funding is the appropriate amount.
I got you. That makes sense. Also, how many people sit on that committee?
It varies, but we have representatives from the Department of Health, Community Services, Park and Recreation. It depends upon the area of the grant.
So we as board members don't choose who sits on the granting committee?
But these are representatives from within the department.
Okay. Can I get a list? Can we get a list of those individuals that sit on the committee as well?
We can.
That's my questions and comments, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Adrian.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Susan Harden.
Thank you, Chairman. Adrian, do you know how, I know that when we got the AAC presentation, I think the request to Mecklenburg County was $5 million. Was that correct from the ASC?
That's correct.
Do you remember how much money they were going to ask the city of Charlotte for?
I don't recall the amount they were going to ask the city of Charlotte.
And do you know how much additional funding increases the ASC received in the city of Charlotte request?
I do not.
The city manager's budget does not include any additional funding for ASC.
So can you say that again, Michael, please?
There is no additional funding recommended for the ASC in the city manager's budget.
So, and if you as you think about it, an industry that's just been absolutely devastated by COVID, a sector of our economy. I don't know that if we have our economists there, or whatever. I just wonder what the impact of complete closure of venues and performance spaces has meant to the arts sector. Can anybody answer that?
We'll get a response for that question.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes my questions.
Okay, Commissioner Susan Rodriguez McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to the CSG funding, the panel of experts, is that entirely made up of staff, or are there any community members that are part of that panel?
In the current year, this has been entirely made up of staff. In previous years, depending on the nature of the grant, we may have an expert coming from outside. Okay.
And I'd like to get more information about that. You can give it to me, later if you want, as far as sort of the history of that and how we come to, decide on how to make those grants. I'm really interested in that. So I'd love some more information about that. I really want to say I appreciate Commissioner Fuller's insights into sort of the breakdown between, when folks turn into vendors and, I appreciate what Mr. Bryant said about, I think that was Mr. Bryant who said we're an increase of 124,000 over FY20. But I think Commissioner Fuller's insights are really, I appreciate your experience there. Just how these things are separated out over the budget. It's really good to be able to keep in mind pulling these things together. So anyways, I really appreciate that discussion. But on the arts, I just want to make sure, I want to clarify what was said. Did you say there was no funding at all or no additional funding from the city?
There's no additional funding. The city manager is not recommending an increase to ASC in his budget for 2021.
Okay, so they're keeping the funding that they had in FY20.
That's correct.
Okay, that's helpful to know. And I wanted to just clarify, I think Dina said that this was a request coming from the ASC. Did she get a modified request after the initial $5 million request? Did they go back and say, this is the most critical parts, or how did we come to this?
They did go back after they learned about the fiscal situation that the county is challenged with. The ASC leadership team submitted a second request for the county manager's consideration.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes my questions.
Okay, Elaine Powell.
Thank you. I'd like to get some more details on the increase for the grants, the $900,000 worth of grants, because we do have additional funding. And so that was kind of a surprise given the fiscal situation that we're in. So if we could get more details on that and why Jeep thought that these were important, I'd like to see his recommendations and what would be done with this money. And also, I don't know if we make this recommendation now or later, but given the situation that they're in, if this is something the board does want, I recommend putting it into restricted contingency. So if we could just get more information on that, thank you. That concludes my comments.
Okay, real briefly, I want to go back to community service grants. And I want to remind us that once you have been on this list for 3 years, you're either, one of two things will happen. You'll either sunset or you will be moved over to the vendor list. I also want to remind us that the vendor list consists of those groups that we would otherwise have to pay for the service if they did not exist. And so with that in mind, for example, I want us to look at Camino Community Development, which is a health center serving low-income, uninsured Hispanic and Latino population. My guess is that after a 3-year funding opportunity, that is a service that we would otherwise have to pay for if Camino didn't exist. So my question is really to the county manager. Is it a requirement that you have to be on this list before you move to the vendor list? Or is it possible to recognize a need that should be on the vendor list so that it doesn't have to go through this process 3 years?
It's absolutely possible that an organization, if we had a service we needed to provide, that we would do it outside of this community service grant process, and that we would, contract with an organization to provide services on our behalf. So no, you don't have to go through this process first.
Okay, thank you. The other thing is when we talk about what we're allocating in this list versus the amount of money that is going through United Way. For those who may not have been here, we may have contributed up to $4,000 at one point. But I remind you that $4,000 went to all big organizations like you see here. They're well established. They got executive directors, all the things that you would expect in a big nonprofit organization. The concern was there was no funding at all going to these little small organizations who sometimes did more work in the community and was more impactful than some of the organizations that you see here on this list, which is why it's important for us to be able to fund those smaller organizations. I just wanted to share that. Let's see. I think that might be it in this. Okay, so we can move to the next portion.
All right, thank you. The next section provides details of the major funding by each agency. In this section, you will see some of the funding that is aligned to the board's priorities, and it's noted with a single asterisk. And because I've already spoken to these items, I will focus on the other funding that is included in the agency budgets and skip over those items that I've already discussed. Next slide. For asset and facility management, there is $1.6 million to provide weapon screening stations at the Valerie C. Woodard building. This funding also includes one, administrative support, manage security access to facilities. Funding for Eastway Rec Center was covered in the previous section. $521,000 is included for the utilities, maintenance, and security for government and library facilities. $33,000 is included for contractual costs for GPS monitoring of county vehicles. The total new funding for this agency is $4.1 million. Next slide. County Assessor's Office, $1.3 million is included for the Revaluation Reserve Fund for preparation for the 2023 revaluation. $1 million is included to make security enhancements and upgrades to our assessment software. In addition, there is $250,000 for continued document scanning, for a total funding for the agency of $2.7 million. Next slide. For community support services, there is $43,000 for the operating cost to locate 2 of our mental health clinicians in the new Family Justice Center. And in criminal justice services, there is $174,000 that is recommended for file scanning in the public defender's office. Next slide. Before I go over this slide, I did want to give a partial response for Commissioner Gerald's question about workforce development. My staff were looking into it during the meeting, and there is $1 million in DSS and $200,000 in community resource centers to support training and finding jobs. Of course, we'll get you a more detailed response as well. But in the Department of Social Services, there is $886,000 that is recommended for targeted retention strategies to the Youth and Family Services. These strategies include funding for overtime, after-hours pay, and increased employee wellness and coaching. I've already spoken to the Raise the Age grant match under the mental health priority. $258,000 is included for increased demand for child placements. Also, $250,000 is also included to continue a transformation initiative to improve efficiency of application processing and eligibility determination. $107,000 will support operating costs to co-locate 7 DSS employees in the new Family Justice Center. And $86,000 is also included to support increasing costs for meals to expand services at new meal sites that were opened in the current year. Funding of $1.9 million is recommended for the agency. Next slide. For emergency medical services, or medic, there is 746,000 included for growing contractual costs related to personnel expenses. 682,000 is included to provide for a 3% raise in salary for medic employees. 560,000 will provide additional funding to expand medics capital program for replacement of ambulances, hardware, and IT equipment. 140,000 is recommended to fund growing costs for insurance, and 72,000 will provide funding for an additional telecommunicator. Total funding for medic will increase by 2.2 million. Next slide. For information services and technology, 1.1 million is recommended to fund software that supports the enterprise operations and security. 463,000 is recommended for hardware for connectivity upgrades at county parks and Louisa sites, as well as additional firewalls and network equipment. 250,000 will support the enterprise need for archiving text messages, and 50,000 is recommended to add support during the RNC. Funding in the amount of 1.9 million is being recommended for the Information Services and Technology Department. Next slide. Already spoken of the MWSB program compliance coordinator that's recommended for 77,000 in the Office of Economic Development. Next slide. For Parks and Recreation, all of these items were included in the board priority for parks and greenways and include the operating for Eastway Recreation Center staffing, operating related to the greenway expansions, staff and operation for American Legion Memorial Stadium, turf maintenance irrigation, additional programming for summer camps, and additional programming at nature centers and preserves. The utilities, maintenance, and security costs for Eastway were included in the asset and facility management. Total additional funding that is recommended for parks and recreations for 3.3 million. The next slide. In the Public Health Department, there's 241,000 that is included for a lease at the Charlotte East site for the WIC program. 193,000 will provide advanced tuberculosis testing and additional operating expenses at our clinics. 159,000 is included to provide additional funding for our LabCorp contract. 104,000 is recommended to support increased enrollment in Children's Development Services Agency, as well as 80,000 for additional interpreting services. One new school nurse is recommended to staff the Ray K-8 STEAM Academy, and 60,000 is included to provide additional funding for PrEP. Additional funding of 902,000 is included in the recommended FY 2021 budget for public health. The next slide. For public information, 75,000 is added to manage and provide content for a digital billboard on the 4th Street parking deck, and 51,000 for software improvements to ensure continued compliance with ADA for our websites. 126,000 is recommended to support public information. And for our libraries, 350,000 is included to support a facility master plan to begin addressing library deserts, and 73,000 for lease escalation for a total of 423,000. Next slide. In the Register of Deeds, 125,000 is included in the budget to add one administrative support coordinator and some additional temporary staffing. Next slide. For the Sheriff's Office, spoke previously regarding the 1.2 million included for contracted services related to mental health. There is also 698,000 to increase contracted services for laundry and food preparation. 682,000 is included to provide additional staffing at the RNC. 218,000 will fund replacement of bulletproof vests. 100,000 will fund supplies related to clothing and hygiene for juvenile offenders. 54,000 will replace 3 narcotic detection canines. 3 million in additional funding is recommended for the Sheriff's Office. Next slide. That concludes the section regarding additional funding for agencies.
Okay, Commissioner Copham, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one request. Thank you for the presentation. Whenever I see numbers, I always look to have a point of reference to those numbers. And I would just ask, and I don't know if it would be hard for you to send, but I would like to know what the department might have asked for and what they received. I just expect that we will have some pushback from the community on possibly CMS, possibly the arts. And, it would be good if we could also say, well, not all of our departments got all that they wanted, which I'm sure is the case, but we don't have that information. So again, if you could just think about giving a point of reference to the number, as that would be helpful to me. Thank you very much.
Commissioner, I'll defer to the manager regarding requests from the department.
Could you say that again, please?
So that I will need to
go back and look at that and see what we can provide.
Oh, that would be great. That would be great. Thank you so much. That concludes my question.
Okay, Commissioner Fuller.
Okay, thank you. I just have a couple of questions. I want to go to page 37, which is the Department of Social Services. And you have a raise the age grant match here for $350,000. I imagine that is not all that we are called upon in this budget to spend on raise the age. So what's the total amount from our budget that we're going to be allocating for the raise the age legislation?
Thank you, Commissioner. That's something that we will need to go back and calculate working with our departments. I will also point out the additional funding in the sheriff's office for clothing and hygiene related to and that is related to raise the age. So that funding has impacted a couple different places, and we'll need to calculate that.
All right, yeah. So I'd like to see that, and I thought I remembered the state allocating some money to us for it. I'd just like to get a sense of, not only what all those additional costs are, but how much is the state funding, and then how much are we funding for this. I think we should do it, but I just want to know what the numbers are. Okay, the next thing I have is looking at slide 40, which is for the Office of Economic Development. So, we're in the process of doing our disparity study. And, because of COVID, we haven't been able to, get together to follow up on where that study is. But I'm assuming that there are going to be results from that will require us to do various things differently than we have in the past. Do we have any insight into, because I'm thinking if we don't do anything in this budget, we're not really going to be addressing those things until a year from now. And, that may not fit with the urgency of this issue. So can you tell me a little bit about what our thinking is on what kind of investments we're going to need to make in as a result of our disparity study, and whether those things are reflected in our budget?
Thanks.
I'm going to ask Leslie to respond to that.
I believe you're muted, Leslie. I'll reach out to her offline.
Okay.
Be unmuted now.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So what I was noting is that the Griffin and Strong body of work is still being conducted. and that they are currently doing the statistical analysis as well as trying to determine what is the marketplace discrimination data as it relates to private sector availability. So we have not gotten any specific details as it relates to the recommendations and funding associated with it. However, we are aware that it is going to require us to revisit some of our practices, our procedures, our policies, and the like. And in order to do that first wave of work, it's going to require more staffing than the one position that we have to carry that out. So we believe that the first body of work can be undertaken by committing additional resources. And then if there's any financial implications that we need to consider, we would do that in the next fiscal year. But unfortunately, I don't have that additional detail at this time. They're still on progress. But remember, when we expanded the scope of the work, we put ourselves in a position where we weren't going to get enough detail for this fiscal year. But we wanted to make sure that we had the broader scope of analysis done, and therefore that's why we're not going to have that for this wave.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you for reminding me of that. I appreciate that response. And so is the MWSB program compliance coordinator, is that in anticipation of at least the first wave of things that we may have to do in response to the study, or is that something separate?
No, that is exactly what that is support of.
Okay, very good. Okay, very good. Thank you for that. And then under Park and Recreation, I haven't had an update recently about where we are with American Legion Memorial Stadium. Do we expect to hear something about where we are with that anytime soon?
What I would say with regards to that is we're on course. I know that based on conversations that both Adrian and Mike may be having with respective commissioners, there's been a question, and I know that we have already prepared a response, but if the 100,000-foot view is we're on course, that project is moving along, and we still anticipate that we'll be ready to open by 2021, probably the March time period.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to, get some insight as to, where we are with the, design and construction. I haven't been by there, so I haven't physically seen what's going on over there. So thank you for that. I look forward to that. And then finally, I wanted to ask about in the public health department, we have the TB clinics and $193,000 for that. Is that amount in the place of, you remember you asked for some additional fees that we were thinking about charging relating to TB. Is this $193,000 intended to be in place of that fee increase?
No, Commissioner, that's not in place of the fee increase. That's just growing cost.
Okay, all right. So I mentioned when we were talking about those fees that depending on what the amount was, that maybe we should, provide those services rather than charging additional fees for it. So I would like to see if we can include that in our budget, or at least know what the impact would be, because it may be that we should provide that without charging some additional fees for it. And then the last thing I have relating to PrEP, I'd like to know where we are with that. Are we being effective? Are we reaching the people we need to reach? How many people have been served already? Comparing that to the need that's in the community. I see we've got $60,000 additional, and that's great. But I just want to have some insight into how we're doing with that and whether the $60,000 is enough. Does anybody have any insight into that part of this budget recommendation?
We'll get you a more full report on where we are with PrEP.
Okay. Yeah, I support it, of course. I mean, I think it's a terrific program. It's a terrific service for us to provide. I just like to be able to tell the community what we've been able to accomplish and be specific about what additional work we need to do. So anyway, those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Fuller, this is Leslie.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Just a little more specific as it relates to American Regional Memorial Stadium. As indicated, construction is progressing well. To date, all site demolition has been completed. Our contractor has completed the construction on the new stormwater culvert, which is the culvert that runs under the field. Mass grading for the site is complete. Construction crews have begun constructing the new field wall at the base of the seating bowl, as well as along the concourse. Grading for the new stadium concourse has begun as well. And then we're also now in coordination with regards to utility construction, as well as putting the basis for the new field lighting down. Again, the project is still on point with regards to being on course for the late February, March time period to be near completion. And they also have worked with the Arts and Science Council with regards to identifying the artists for the public space.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. I know we've got some innovative things going on with the field surface, I remember. So I'm really excited about that project. So thank you very much.
All right, Commissioner Scarborough, any questions?
No questions at this time.
All right, Commissioner Leek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. As we look at the Economic Development Office, I want to say something pertaining to the small business consortium that we have that I feel, and the community feels, is making a great contribution. We did not know to ask for funds, and we have been operating at no cost to the county at all. And the Office of the Economic Development Department leans heavily on our participation to help them to have constituents with whom to work. So we will be coming back to you, and I wish that we would say thank you to the public who helps us to make it happen in the name of the county, and giving information and making sure the exposure is there, and that the requesting of looking at contracts for the state, local, and federal government, and helping these people become aware of what they can do, and hopefully encourage them to do even more. In saying that, we had 9 young women or 10 young women to go to Kenya to spread the news about Mecklenburg County Economic Development Program. So I would hope that in all that we do, that we don't forget those who continue to support this community without asking for a dime, but we will be back. And I hope that you will say something kind about that organization and its efforts to make things happen in this community. Thank you. That's my comment about economic development.
Okay, Commissioner Jarrell.
My questions have been covered, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Harding.
Thank you. Can we go back to the Department of Social Services page? The slide. And these slides are very helpful. Thank you So the $885,750 that are the retention strategies, is that in addition to the 3%?
Yes, Commissioner, that those are targeted retention strategies in youth family services, and include things like after hours, salary pay, and additional employee assistance.
Are there any other retention strategies in any other departments that we're initiating other than Department of Social Services?
Well, not within the FY 2021 recommended budget. You will recall there were some targeted strategies in the Sheriff's Office that we implemented in the current year.
And I'm just thinking about the comments about nurses and being hard to recruit. So if we're doing retention strategies in Department of Social Services, why isn't that something we're considering doing in public health?
This is Paula. Can I comment on that, please?
Sure.
Right before we went out for this COVID pandemic situation, we were scheduled to meet with Gibby to review an entire salary strategy for hiring nurses, as well as a recruitment strategy. So it's not that we have not been helping other departments in these areas. We engaged with, we actually created a position in the Human Resources Department that focuses on retention strategies. We look at our data. We try to pocket areas where we have these issues. And nurses, environmental health specialists, and social workers are the 3 areas that we've targeted. And so we've got things going on in all of those areas, but many of those do not have the budget impact that this one does. And I just wanted to comment that we have provided assistance to social services with putting in a second shift for social workers so that we can do case management and helping families in the second shift, after normal business hours. And then because those social workers have the stress of going into homes and sometimes having to remove children, that we've provided an additional support through our employee assistance program to provide an on-site counselor for them. And that costs additional money in that contract for EAP services. But we feel like those staff, the burnout in this particular area is high. And so we're trying to provide them some counseling services, which is different from some of the other areas where we're targeting retention strategies. So these were unique and specifically targeted for social services. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does help. While I have you, Paula, can I ask you a question? How many of our employees received extra exposure pay or extra pay because of exposure to COVID, like risk pay or whatever they call that? What is that called?
We out in the community, it's a lot of times it's called hazard duty pay, but we called our special assignment pay. Yep. And we are running that data for you. We'll have those numbers to you hopefully soon. We've had primarily that service provided in the public health department. It's for those nurses that work, those healthcare providers that are working directly with potentially exposed individuals and exposed individuals in like the hotel situations. And then we've also recently worked with the sheriff's department to provide some strategies there for special assignment pay. So we are working on those numbers and we'll get you detailed information coming soon.
Will that special assignment pay continue into next budget year? And is that in this budget?
It may or may not continue. That's to be determined. That is typically funded out of LAP salary dollars. So and anyone else from the budget department can chime in on that answer with more specifics if they like.
At this point, we don't anticipate continuing that pay, but if we do it, it'll be at a much reduced level than what we're doing today.
Okay. So can we go to that? Thank you for that information. And Paula, I appreciate it. Thank you, County Manager. Can I see the AFM page?
Do you know what slide that is? Slide number?
Yeah, that one right there. That's perfect. So I want to talk about, I want to build on Commissioner Powell's comment of, adding new things. And one of the things I see here is the $1.6 million for security screening. Did we have some sort of incident at Valerie Woodard that would necessitate an urgency for this type of security funding? And is that one-time dollars or is that reoccurring dollars?
Commissioner, I cannot speak to any incidences that I'm aware of, but there is, that is reoccurring dollars.
And you recall that you already approved the capital portion of this. So if you remember a few months ago, we brought forward a request for the board to approve the leasing and all the, the construction associated with reconfiguring BCW. This is phase 1 of our enhanced security posture. So the capital portion is actually underway, and this is actually to provide the people to man those security stations.
Thank you. That's helpful. And let me ask you this: where is our our spending for seniors, our additional spending for seniors? Where is that in did I miss that?
Commissioner Harden, there is some additional funding for some growing meal costs for our congregate sites in DSS. But we don't have a specific line for funding for seniors.
So I just, as I think about, again, just, meal expansion, I see it right there, the 86,000. Okay, so that's where that is. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, Commissioner Susan Rodriguez McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also wanted to look at slide 37, the social services. The 885,750 retention strategies. I really support those, the retention strategies there. And I wondered if it was included anywhere else in the budget, specifically the 3% that Commissioner Harden mentioned. And you already answered that, but is it also on page 97 of our budget book? Like, is that another place where that is reflected?
Just a moment. 97, yes, this would be included in the total for social services.
Okay, great. I'm just trying to understand how this thing works. Okay, now on slide 40, this is Office of Economic Development. Actually, it's not listed on this presentation, but in our budget book on page 90 for Office of Economic Development, under the category for other charges, there's $10 million. Can you help me understand what that is?
That would be the commitment for business investment grants and economic development grants. Those are commitments that have already been made.
Okay, so when it says FY20 adopted 10,552,000, that's for ones that we've already done, but then in FY21, that's for future? That's on.
That is for our estimated payments for those grants that have been awarded. They are paid after the taxes are received from those entities, and they're paid out over different years.
Okay, I get it. Thank you very much. That's super helpful. Okay, and then on slide 45, let's see, this is under Sheriff's Office. The 682,635 for the RNC, is that going to be reimbursed?
We do expect for that to be reimbursed.
Okay, and so that's in total. So we still have to have it on our budget, even though it's going to be reimbursed?
That is correct.
Okay, so can you just explain a little bit about how that works? Does it? I just need a little understanding about how the reimbursement, like how does that get then added to our budget?
Sarah can respond to that.
Hi, yes, to give a little bit of background for the RNC funding that we may be eligible from the city, as Michael mentioned earlier, that is going to be limited primarily to any security costs. It is something where what we do is we fill out the sheriff's office and other first responders that are manning the RNC itself will be providing timesheet information to the city and CMPD, who is managing the grant for RNC. And they will, based on the amount of grant funding that's left, reimburse some of those costs. We are not certain we will recover all of those costs, but we do expect to get some amount of funding back.
Okay, now when you say some, that just leaves it really open. So can you say, you expect to get 90% back, 10% back? Like what are we talking here? That's a lot of money.
It's a really good point. At this time, we don't know exactly what percent we'll get back. We did look back at the percent that we received from the Democratic National Convention. However, there is quite a bit in the air. And also I'll point out that this 682,000 is an estimate because we don't quite know how the RNC will play out. There's a lot of different moving parts in that. So we do know that we are going to apply for and get some reimbursement back, but we just aren't able at this time to say what percent that is. We are engaging with the city as part of the RNC planning and making sure we're sharing full information, but there's a lot of unknowns still on that number.
Okay, I just want to say that that this expenditure, you know, putting this on our budget is something that's really the idea that the RNC is still going to happen in August it still feels like a question mark in my mind, and you know, I don't know how. I don't want to say too much about this, but I just think this is incredible that we are going to be spending this kind of money on something that probably should be virtual. So if it does become a virtual convention, what happens to these funds? They just become part of fund balance? Is that what happens?
So Commissioner, this funding that you see here is the total expense, and there is total revenue. So if we don't receive the revenue and don't expend the expenses, then it would not revert to fund balance.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's helpful. And then just one last thing I wanted to say is I really appreciated Commissioner Cotham's suggestion about, you know, finding out what the departments asked for and what they received. And that's something that I would really find helpful, you know, even if we weren't in COVID, just kind of trying to understand what the department's needs as they perceive them versus how much we're able to, you know, meet those needs in our budget. It would be really great information to have. So I just wanted to say I support that recommendation. And that concludes my comments.
Okay, Commissioner Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I will support Commissioner Cotham and Commissioner Rodriguez-McDowell in saying that I think that it is important to know what the department's requested, because I think it's been whittled down quite a bit, you know, their first ask versus what it is, you know, now that we're in this global pandemic. And it will be helpful for the community to know how whittled down the budgets are. In addition, I think it's really important to hear again from the advisory board members about what they think is crucial. It's really important for us to listen to the community and represent them in this process. I looked up the number and in support of Commissioner Fuller about the TB risk assessment. I hope we can go into that in more detail at some point, but I think it's the number I saw was $13,280. So that would be the impact if it doesn't move forward as a fee. And as far as the RNC, last year we had this discussion about not knowing exactly what would be reimbursed in one of our committee meetings. So we did ask Dina to keep track of that. And I'm pretty sure she's keeping really good track of it so that we'll know what our expenditures are and submit them for as much reimbursement as we can get. I had a question about COVID pay, the pay for special assignment pay. Can that come out of the COVID dollars, Dina?
We're not sure yet. That's one of the things that's on our list to do additional research. I don't know if Sarah has any more insight into that, but the last time I think we talked about it, it wasn't clear whether or not that would be reimbursable under that or not. Sarah, do you have any more insight into that?
Yeah, that's right. There are some things that we know could be reimbursed. So for example, the special assignment pay or pay associated with those staff who have been reassigned or who are working direct response to COVID-19. However, for some of the other aspects of it, we're still investigating what options we might have for reimbursement.
Okay, I hope you're looking across all departments because there are so many employees that have had to work extra time and with the public, especially in Parks and Rec and in solid waste at our full service centers. So they're working directly with the public, and they're working harder than they've ever worked, at overtime and weekends. And so I hope we're looking at everyone who's working directly with the public. And I just want to thank everybody for all of the dedication to keeping the county stable. Like, the more I look at it in detail, the more I can tell how much focus was on keeping everything stable. And I really appreciate that. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Okay, I just have one question. It was painfully obvious to me, if not to everybody, that either no requests were considered from the courts. There was no mention, there was not a page that said that they made a presentation to the county. And typically, those agencies and organizations that make a county presentation, there's some comment one way or the other. So I was curious about that.
Chairman Dunlap, the funding for the courts is located within the Criminal Justice Department, and that is what is included there is the funding for the digital scanning. That is for the courts.
That was the only thing that was considered.
Within the major adjustments.
Okay.
There was also some funding included for some cost of living for Larry King Clubhouse.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And so thank you for that. I guess I'm grateful to the fact that somebody had to make a decision about where some of those requests would be cut, because it would probably be a whole lot more difficult for the 9 of us to determine that, given that we're not really involved in those agencies on a day-to-day basis. And had it not been for those cuts, our budget would have surpassed what has already been recommended. So we're ready to move to the next part.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask just one additional question?
Sure.
All right. So I want to go back to, thank you. I want to go back to ask about a email that we got about potential revenue opportunities, if you want to call it that, from various COVID-related legislation coming out of the of our nation's capital. And I looked back at that list, and there were a lot of TBDs on there, suggesting potentially, hopefully, that there's some other funding opportunities in various that would go into various departments' budgets from relating to COVID-19. Do we have any updates on that, or how can we keep track of that stuff? Because it might impact, some line items, perhaps, for these various departments of county government. Do we have any sense of, for a lot of those things that were listed as potential revenue opportunities from the various pieces of legislation related to COVID-19?
Yeah, Starla is tracking those pretty carefully, and she provides us updates as we get more information. But at this point, I think the information that you have is the latest and greatest on a lot of those pieces of legislation, but we can follow up with her.
Yeah, because it might lessen some of our budget impacts of things that we already have listed, or maybe that are already in the department budgets anyway. So thank you. I'll keep track of that.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Trevor, because this past week, we did have a meeting with Senator Tillis where we shared with him some of the additional concerns we had that we thought might need to be funded. And he also asked if there were things that we hadn't come up with yet. that we think they should be funding and to bring that to his attention. And so I'm certain that staff is preparing that information to be shared with him. But thank you for reminding us of that. Okay, we're ready to move.
All right. In the next section, I'll cover the law enforcement and fire protection service districts. Next slide. This table shows the FY 2020 tax rates and revenue compared to the FY 2021 tax rates and revenue for the 6 law enforcement service districts. It is important to note that the revenue shown here for Cornelius Law Enforcement Service District also includes $453,000 in funding from the general fund for Lake Patrol. Based on the tax value and the value of the penny, a tax increase is needed to support the contractual expense for Cornelius Law Enforcement Service District with the same amount of funding. Next slide. This table shows the FY 2020 tax rates and the revenue compared to the FY 2021 tax rates and revenue for the 5 law enforcement service districts. The recommended rates are the result of both changes in the tax values, value of a penny, and the annualized cost for fire protection. A rate increase is recommended for Charlotte, Cornelius, Davidson, and Huntersville. Next slide. This table shows the contracts with the Charlotte volunteer fire departments for the current year compared to the recommended amount. Cook's Volunteer Fire Department is recommended for a full year of funding per their request. Next slide. So before I conclude with the overview, I would like to briefly recap the overall strategy of the manager's recommended budget. Since the last recession, policies that have been set in place by our county manager and the commitment to fiscal discipline by the Board of County Commissioners has given the county a strong foundation to weather the impact of the revenue loss that we anticipate for fiscal year 2021, while continuing to provide critical service, making modest investments in the board's budget priorities. Fiscal year 2021 is characterized by uncertainty. However, by maintaining a fund balance as we enter into the new year, we are better suited to respond to these uncertainties. And so, County Manager Diorio, that concludes my overview of the 2021 recommended budget.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Appreciate all your efforts as well as everybody else.
Okay, before we move on, I think there might be some questions about this department, this section as well. Commissioner Coffin.
No questions at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Fuller.
I have no questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Scarborough.
I have no questions.
Commissioner Leak.
No questions, and thank you.
Commissioner Harden. I'm sorry, Commissioner Jarrell.
No questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Commissioner Harden.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Susan Rodriguez McDowell.
I just want to say thank you to the staff for their professionalism through this presentation. I don't have any further questions, but I just wanted to give the staff a huge shout out for being able to answer these questions for us in such a timely manner.
Commissioner Powell.
Thank you. I'm so happy to see funding for cooks through the year. So thank you. And do they know our recommendation, or is this the first time they'll see it? Hello?
Leslie, do you know the answer to that?
Yes, I do. Yes, they are aware. Communication has already been remitted to the respective volunteer fire departments.
Thank you. I appreciate you communicating that. And thank you. You did a great job, Adrian. Thank you. That concludes my comments.
Okay, and so I have a question about the Fire Protection Service Districts. So remind me where we landed in terms of our staff's recommendation because as I look at these requested tax rates, if the requested tax rate for Charlotte is 7.5 cents, it kind of makes what Steel Creek was requesting seems more palatable. So walk me through that again, Leslie.
Sure. The request, the 7.5, meets the needs or the funding request from all of the volunteer fire departments, inclusive of Steel Creek. It's exactly what they recommended. So everybody is getting what they recommended. The only slight difference that you may not be able to see at this point is that after the presentation that Ebenezer had to you back a few months ago, Cooks made a slight revision to their request. The additional funding and the original proposals all have additional, includes the capital costs, as well as the additional personnel per shift. Remember, we were funding 2 personnel. We now are funding 3 personnel, or 3 firefighters per shift. And so that's what this 7.5 reflects. The communication that went to the volunteer fire departments also indicate that the plan is to fund through this entire fiscal year, but we will still be partnering with Charlotte Fire to determine if it's viable for us to start in July 21 of the phase out that was originally proposed. So they have basically a year's notice from when, or over a year's notice with regards to what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay, but this budget funds their request through the entire year for each department listed.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. I'm glad y'all were able to resolve that. Okay, are there any final questions, last minute questions? All right, hearing none, County Manager, any final comments?
No, we just look forward to going back and getting you all the answers to the questions that you presented today. And if there's other questions that come up between now and the straw vote session, please let us know so we can provide you every piece of information you need.
Okay, so thank you. Let me ask one question. I know some of us live closer to downtown than others. Some of you probably still need to eat. Is 2 o'clock still going to be a viable time for us to recess to? Anybody got problems with that?
2:30, Doc.
2:30?
Yes, sir.
Okay, can everybody be there at 2:30?
That works.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate the extra time.
All right, so we will stand in recess to 2:30 in room 267.